Top 9 challenges IT leaders will face in 2023, predictions for enterprise IT in 2023, as well as fallacies of ERP software and digital transformation. Those are just a few of the topics we're going to cover today in episode 103 of Transformation Ground Control.
This is Transformation Ground Control, your source for all things business, technology, strategy, and change. If you're growing your business, leading change within your organization, or undertaking any sort of operational or technology change initiative, this podcast is for you. This show covers what you need to know about digital transformation, organizational change, operational improvement, and business growth.
5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, here's your host, Eric Kimberling.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm the CEO of Third Stage Consulting. We're an independent consulting firm that helps clients throughout the world reach their third stage of digital transformation success. And this is the podcast that has everything to do with digital transformation, the strategy, people, process, and technology sides of change. And with me, as always, is my co-host, Cheatham. Kyler, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. Happy to be here.
Yes, happy to have you and happy to have the audience here today, our third episode of 2023. And a lot of good stuff we're going to cover here today. We're going to cover the top 9 challenges of IT leaders in 2023, predictions for enterprise IT in 2023, kind of continuing with that thread of predicting what we think is going to happen here in this new year. And then later, we're going to have Darren Roos, the CEO of IFS Software. He's going to be on the show to talk about the fallacies of ERP software and digital transformation. So looking forward to that conversation. And then last but not least, later in the show, we'll have John Reed on the show, who is from Diginomica. He'll be talking about, we're actually going to replay a clip that we did around this time last year where we talked about the trends for 2022. And we want to revisit those 7 trends to see how they held up and to see if they're still relevant here in 2023. So that'll be the topic of conversation later. And then actually in that hot topic segment too, in the opening segment where we talk about top 9 challenges of IT leaders and predictions for enterprise IT in 2023, we're also going to start a new segment or part of the hot topic segment where we draw questions that we get on social media, questions and comments, I should say. So that should be a little bit more engaging and interactive. So we'll be sure to cover that as well during our opening segment. But before we get all of that, just a quick reminder, new episodes of this show every Wednesday. You can find us on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter. You can also find us on audio podcasts throughout the world, including Amazon, Google, Apple, etc. So all that being said, let's jump into these hot topics. What have you got for us today, Kyler?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, a recent article in CIO Magazine talked about the 9 challenges IT leaders will face in 2023. So I wanted to ask you about a few of these and kind of get your recommendation on how you would, as an IT leader, address them or set up strategies for success. So the first one I want to ask you about is the need to grow smartly. And the reason I want to ask you about this is, if our audience hasn't seen it, Eric recently did a video, and we talked about it in last week's episode, about the Southwest IT complete implosion around the holiday season and kind of the aftermaths or any sort of key learnings that we could garner from that case study. So Southwest has kind of teetered on, being a global company, but at the same time having a lean IT stack and the need to grow, but still having those band-aided approaches to just be mindful of things like budget. So how would you address a company or even a CIO that knows that their technology is lacking, but they need to grow smartly because that's the job of executive leaders? How would you approach that in just measuring the overall urgency and spend around new technology?
Yeah, it's a great question and something we do touch on in the Southwest discussion in last week's episode of this podcast. That's episode 102 if you want to go check it out. And it's in the opening segment of that episode. But there's 3 things that come to mind when you mention that. One is to look at a cost benefit. Look at the cost that you're really spending on your legacy IT, which oftentimes is higher than you think when you consider, maintenance cost and the cost of IT staff to maintain and support the system, the cost of fixes, repairs, all that stuff. If you look at the real total cost of your current infrastructure, your current legacy tech, and then compare that to the cost benefit of if you were to replace it, or to do some, even if it's not a mass wholesale replacement of all your technology, at least selectively replacing certain parts of it. That's one way to really quantify and get your arms around how much value is potentially there. And also, if you can quantify the risk, one thing we talk about in that Southwest discussion in last week's episode is that they now, after the fact, Southwest can in fact quantify the risk of their legacy tech. And that's going to come in the form of somewhere between 3 and 5% of a write-off, or 3 to 5% of their earnings are going to be hit in Q4 of last year. And that's a very quantifiable, real number that's actually going to be realized. So, one thing that Southwest did not do well is they did not predict or have a good handle on what the risks were and what those costs were. So I think that's the first thing, is do a cost benefit assessment of current state versus what potential future state might be. And it's not just one future state. You have different alternatives. You have sort of incremental improvements. You have massive quantum leap improvements. You have options that are sort of in between. So that cost benefit is one piece of it. The other is to recognize that you don't have to do a full-blown digital transformation. A lot of the comments I've seen recently since that Southwest debacle with their legacy IT has been, hey, they need to do a digital transformation. Well, yeah, of course. I mean, it sounds like they probably do. They need to do some sort of digital transformation, but what does that mean? And a lot of times organizations just get overwhelmed with the idea of replacing all their technology, all these systems they spent decades building and perfecting. Now you're talking about going in and ripping it out and replacing it. And that leads to analysis paralysis a lot of times when organizations think that way. So it's also important to think about incremental changes. What can you do now to have immediate value, low risk, low cost, without necessarily having to go in and replace all of your ERP system, for example? So those are a couple of things that come to mind, is just making sure that you have the cost benefit, and then you really look at what your alternatives are.
Yeah, and I would say what we've seen as a business is engaging those experts, or just asking people when it comes to what are the phased approaches or what are those recommendations. And I have another question about that for you kind of later in our hot topic conversation. But one thing I want to get to when we talk about the overall cost benefit analysis, one of the other challenges we see is resourcing and the diversification of teams. So, for example, the modern IT team looks much different today than it did 5 years ago. And we see CIOs needing to be able to effectively resource and understand the support that their technology needs. So if you were a CIO and you have, say, new technologies, or you're using emerging technologies like AI, predictive analytics, and trying to be more business focused, like we talk about the evolution of that CIO, how would you make sure that you are creating a team of diverse talent that can understand and be more business focused as opposed to technical focus?
It's a great question, and it's easy. It's a lot easier said than done, because you get, when you're in the tech space, you tend to want to focus on specific technologies. You want to further your technical knowledge, which is great. You need that, but you really want to vet out the resources that you have on your internal team, and also your external consultants, by the way, that might be helping you through the transformation. You want to make sure they have that business acumen. So, things you can look for are people that are PMP certified or have some sort of change management certification or experience with change management. Maybe they have experience with the operations and process improvement. That's a really powerful combination when you have someone who really understands business value, business processes, et cetera, and they also have the technical experience. That's a great combo. So it's a bit like finding a unicorn. You're looking for that purple squirrel, but if you can vet out the resources, and all things being equal, defer or err on the side of hiring someone with more business knowledge and maybe not quite as much technical knowledge, I think that's a pretty good trade-off.
Absolutely. And I know you talk a lot and have a lot of content around how do you get into the consultant industry, and a lot of your recommendations are around having a more business focused background, or having the opportunity to just ask questions and be curious about business if you want to be kind of in the consultant area. So it seems that's not only a trend on the enterprise side, but also the professional services side as well.
Right. Absolutely. It's something that is really important to us when we hire and build out our team. We can always find people that probably know more about technology and maybe even have deeper technical capabilities than people on our team, myself included. But we tend to gravitate toward people that have some baseline good understanding of technology, but they also have that business operations, organizational change, understanding as well.
Absolutely. And you know me, I can't pass up a shameless plug. So if you are interested in joining our team, please feel free to reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also go to our website and go to our careers page as well. So we hire a variety of different consultants that have a business background, that have a technical background, and both. So just had to throw that in there.
Yeah, it's a great plug. We're growing quickly, especially this year and right this moment. So if you are interested in making a plunge into consulting, or you're looking to switch consulting firms if you're already in it, we'd love to have you on the team and love to chat with you about what that looks like. So that's a good point.
Well, with that, let's move to some of the 2023 predictions for IT. And there's one I really want to share with you, and I'm actually going to read it, how it showcases in Forbes. This article is from Forbes. And the trend is hybrid multi-cloud becomes more than just a cool thing to say. And I'm not even going to just elaborate on that. I just want kind of your knee-jerk reaction to that overall headline.
Well, I love buzzwords. So you had
Yeah.
me at hybrid multi-cloud, which means to me it's a bunch of gibberish. I think the reason that buzzwords are such a trigger for me is because when words like that, they just don't mean anything. Like hybrid. What is it? Hybrid what? Multi-cloud? Is that what you said?
Yes.
I mean, if you really think about that, what in the world does that mean? I know what they're referring to, but it's just such a weird term. But anyway, so that's my knee-jerk reaction. It's just another buzzword that we don't need, that doesn't help things. It doesn't help clarify things in the industry. So I guess that would be my knee-jerk reaction to it.
And all buzzwords aside, the content of that prediction talks about the need for kind of refactoring, re-architecting of different applications associated with the digital enterprise. That's what they mean by multi-cloud. So is that something that you feel as though focusing on that interoperability, integrations, making your data, arming it to be as actionable as possible, will that be a main trend for IT in 2023?
Absolutely. And I think the key word in that is hybrid. In hybrid, I think anything to do with hybrid will become more and more relevant as organizations struggle with getting the scale and the business value of cloud and other sorts of solutions, but also retaining the flexibility where they need it. And in some cases, that's where the hybrid comes into play. It may mean that you look at more on-prem solutions to augment your cloud systems. It could mean, you rely more on Internet of Things and best-of-breed solutions, whatever it may mean. I think it's a good indicator that there's a lot of options in the marketplace, and it's a matter of finding the right technology stack and combination that's the best for your organization and your strategy.
Absolutely. And I know you'll kind of dive into that with the guests in our other episode, or the rest of our episode, I should say. So definitely stay tuned for that. But now I have to go to Eric's question jar here. So if you follow Ground Control, you'll know that we did we called them mean tweets or mean TikToks a few weeks back that just featured a lot of our user questions. And we decided to make it kind of the main segment of the episode because many times you guys have a lot of great questions that you ask Eric on TikTok, on Twitter, on LinkedIn. So what I've done is made a combination of all of those questions and put them in my question jar. I have to credit my 2- and 4-year-old for vandalizing my office with sticky notes for this idea. So thank you to them. But if you'd like to be included on our weekly Eric's question jar, you can tag me on all platforms. It's just at Kyler Cheatham. My name is the same on all platforms. Or you can tag Third Stage Consulting Group, and we'll include these each week. So are you ready, Eric?
I'm ready.
More scrutiny. You thought it was just once a year we would do this.
I know. So just to clarify, though, before you pull the first one, are these all mean comments again, or is this just sort of a variety of mean and interesting? Okay, good.
No, I should clarify that. Please don't be mean to Eric on the internet. Please don't be mean to anyone on the internet. I feel like we should just agree to a society as that. So these are not mean. Some are funny, but they are mostly really good questions from your incredible audience and user base that I think we should ask. So
yes.
With that, you ready?
I'm ready. Ready to roll.
All right. So this is a good one. So this one reads, why is SAP so much more complex to implement than any other system?
Great question. Well, I'd say two things. One is SAP is just a big system built for big, complex, diverse organizations. So the nature of the customer base they're trying to satisfy is complexity. And I don't think they set out to design a really complex or the most complex system in the market. I suppose I agree that it probably is the most complex. I've never really thought to sit down and measure or compare systems in terms of complexity, but it probably is one of the most, if not the most complex systems for that reason. I think the other thing that SAP sort of is getting stuck in right now, in my opinion, is they've got this new S4 HANA platform, which is based on the HANA or S4 HANA system that's based on the HANA platform. And it's integrated for the most part. The core ERP system is a fully integrated solution with different modules that can do different things, of course. And that's really what SAP's always been good at is the integration. So the downside of full integration and end processes is you make one change to the software upstream, it affects things downstream, and there's just a lot of complexity and nuances you've got to work through. And then you add to the fact that more recently, in the last decade or more, SAP is really focused on also going out on an acquisition spree and buying up companies like Concur and Ariba, SuccessFactors, et cetera, business objects. They bought all these different sort of best of breed providers, and now they're trying to bolt it on to this core system. So it's adding even more complexity in that way. So I think all those things are unintentional reasons why SAP is complex in that way.
And wouldn't it be true to say SAP typically supports very complex global large businesses too?
Yes. Yeah. They more so than most vendors are trying to deal with, they're trying to address global multinational complex organizations. They're trying to deal with diverse companies, diversified organizations that don't have just a really vanilla way of doing things. And in many ways, SAP is trying to be everything to everyone. Whether or not they're being successful at it, that's a whole nother debate, but that is their general strategy. I don't think they've ever stated anywhere in their strategic documentation that they're trying to be everything to everyone, but they sort of are, and just in their actions, in my opinion. So I think that, again, that creates some of that complexity unintentionally, of course.
Perfect. Great answer. All right, next one. Do you have to redesign processes, specifically business processes, for a SaaS system? It seems like most system integrators don't have that operational experience.
Ooh, great question. Do you have to redesign your processes? Well, let me add a preface to this or a caveat. I'd say you don't have to necessarily, but you're probably going to. Not necessarily whether you want to or not. I suppose is a different story. You're just going to have to in many ways, because SaaS software in many ways is more standard. There's just common processes, common ways of doing things, and that's going to require a certain amount of process change and process improvement. So it's a great point in that the gap between where you are today and where you're going in the future is probably going to be greater for SaaS solutions than a private cloud or an on-premise sort of solution. And I agree with the other part of that question, which is most implementers and system integrators don't have the operational knowledge. Absolutely agree with that. It goes back to what we were talking about before about building your internal IT group. If you can find the skill set that's both technical and business oriented, which is very difficult to do, that's going to be ideal, and that's going to help navigate that or close that gap or that bridge between technology and the business.
Yeah, and it seems like if you can even evolve that mindset within the department to be more business and operational focus, understand the impact of the overall systems as well, that's a good checks and balance for a system integrator that is an important partner, but still, has a specific function.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, next. Some of these are stuck to the side. So
no mean ones yet. I'm
I know.
surprised. And by the way, if you want to hear all mean stuff, I know you mentioned it, Kyler, but if you go back to episode number 101, the opening segment it was the first episode of 2023. That's the opening segment was all mean TikTok comments. So if you're getting tired of this, getting tired of these nice comments and easy softball questions, you go back to episode 101 for all the really mean stuff.
Yeah, and I will have a caveat. Eric does not know these questions. I get that question a lot of saying, like, how do you prep Eric for these types? I don't. he does not know these questions. So
Partially
this is
because I hate prep. I don't do well with
We're
prep, so I
not
just refuse to do
preppers
it.
here, even though we don't recommend that from a business standpoint. But this
Right.
one's funny. This is one of my favorites on your voiceover TikTok specifically. Thank you, Dr. House. And so there seems to be a trend that people think you sound like Dr. House, which is actually a show, a popular TV show, Dr. House. And the reason this is so funny is the actor that plays Dr. House is Hugh Laurie, who is British.
Oh,
So,
okay. So I need to work on my producer
yeah, so
accents.
they think you sound like Dr. House, who is very smart and knowledgeable. So that's a nice
Oh,
compliment.
okay. I need to go look that up. I don't know who Dr. House is.
Oh,
I
you
don't
fall
watch
down
I don't
the
watch
rabbit
much TV, so I need to go check that out.
All right, this is about your moving from a legacy to a new system. So the biggest problem from moving or migrating from a legacy system to a new system is the client wants to customize everything new like the old.
Hmm.
Interested to hear your thoughts on that.
It's really true. I mean, that's the dark side of customization, is that it gives you an easy out if you don't want to change. So if you don't want to change your processes, you don't want to change the way you've been doing things forever, it's an easy out. Let's just change the new software to do what you've always done. There's some cases, though, where that's irrelevant or where that's appropriate, where you've got some sort of core competitive advantage that's really unique to you, and that's what gets you more business and makes you successful in the marketplace. Sure, then maybe that is something you're either going to customize, or you're going to go find a point solution to address, or maybe even custom develop a software for it. That's not a terrible thing. But I think the problem with the industry is these decisions are often so binary. It's like either you customize or you don't. And the reality is, well, okay, maybe you lean towards not customizing, but you're probably going to have to customize something. It's rare that we ever see companies, other than like some of our smaller clients and some of our younger clients, as far as they just haven't been established as long, they just have an easier time migrating to like a SaaS solution or a newer technology compared to like an organization that's been around for a couple hundred years and the average tenure is 25 years, for employees. That's just going to be harder to change. And it's going to be more likely that the latter example are going to want to customize the software. So it's a great point. And one thing I also mentioned too is that heavy customization is oftentimes the symptom or the result of not investing enough in organizational change management. So if you're not investing enough in organizational change management, odds are pretty high that you're going to end up going down some customization rabbit holes that you don't want to do, especially if you don't have good project governance and controls on top of that. So if you're lacking organizational change and you're lacking project governance and controls, it's going to be really hard for you to go through a transformation without significant customization that you probably don't need.
Absolutely. And we do have a blog about this on our website if you do want more information on, I think it's actually called The Dark Side of Customization. But I will pop it in the comments here for the live episode if you want more information there. So let's do one more. Are you still up for it?
Sounds good. Yep. I'm still standing so far.
That's great. This is a very interesting one. Are consultants more commonly affected by bias for tier 1 systems?
It's a good question. I would say yes, only because the tier 1 systems require such big armies of consultants, and the big system integrators tend to focus on tier 1 products like SAP, Oracle, maybe Microsoft Dynamics. So you just have more sheer volume of consultants that specialize in tier 1 and therefore are going to drink the Kool-Aid for that particular vendor. And it's, if you think about it, if you're a consultant and you work for Accenture or Deloitte or, insert system integrator name here, and you've been trained and brought up in the world of, let's just say, Oracle. You just know Oracle. That's all you know. You're going to lead with Oracle first. I mean, that's what you know. It's the bias that was ingrained in your upbringing in your career. And so you may not intentionally do it, but you're just going to have an Oracle bias. You're not going to be likely to say, you know what, this software is just not a good fit. You should go with SAP. Partly because you're not going to know any better necessarily if all you know is Oracle. But second of all, because your large SI employer is probably going to tell you don't ever say that. And I was told that at a young age. Don't ever mention anything other than SAP. In my case, it was all SAP. Let's figure out how we can get the SAP footprint as large as possible in each and every client that we work in. And that was just what our directives were from the higher ups within that SI. So yes, I do agree. I think that's the reason why you see so many consultants that are biased toward tier one solutions.
Well, that was a great round of questions. And just a reminder, if you'd like to be in Eric's question jar here, you can go ahead and comment on any sort of his, he has TikTok, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, anything like that. We pull from everything. So you can tag me or tag Third Stage Consulting, and we'll get these questions in and address them each week. So thank you, audience, most importantly, for those great questions. And thank you, Eric, for all of your insight.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you, audience, for great questions there. That makes it more interactive and more fun in these hot topic segments. So we'll continue to mix those into our opening segments of the podcast for this year going forward. So we're going to shift gears, and it actually unintentionally builds on some of the things we just talked about in some of those questions that you randomly picked, Kyler. We're going to have, after the break, we're going to have Darren Roos, who's the CEO of IFS Software. He's going to be on the show talking about fallacies of ERP software and digital transformation. So we'll be talking about some of the common misconceptions, misunderstandings, things that you should know, the pitfalls, the risks, things you should know about ERP implementations and digital transformations. We're going to talk about that with Darren here in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with more Transformation Ground Control.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation? Then you need our newly released 2023 Digital Transformation Report. This comprehensive report covers the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to ensure your digital transformation is optimized for success. The 2023 Digital Transformation Report is packed full of proven methodologies and insights from experts in the independent digital transformation field. You'll also receive practical insights on how to implement digital transformation strategies within your unique organization. This free report is available for download on our website at thirdstage-consulting.com under our Thought Leadership section.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. My name is Eric Kimberling. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms throughout the world. So be sure to check us out, subscribe, leave us a comment or review. We'd love to hear from you. So our next guest is Darren Roos, who's the CEO of IFS Software. And we wanted to have him on the show to talk about the fallacies of ERP software and digital transformation. And just as a side note here, Darren is only the third software vendor we've had on the show. The first one we had was the CEO of Odoo Software. Second one was the president of Epicor Software. And now our third vendor guest is the CEO of IFS. And I was always very resistant to having vendors on the show because I didn't want it to turn into a commercial for their product. And in this case, that's why we're not going to just talk about IFS and how awesome it is. From Darren's perspective, we're going to talk about more general digital transformation trends and things to be aware of, more specifically fallacies and misconceptions in the space. And these blind spots that we're going to talk about are really damaging. They undermine digital transformation success. And a lot of these fallacies and misconceptions we're going to talk about are some of the reasons why so many transformations fail. So we're going to try to get to the bottom of it so we can avoid those sorts of mistakes and avoid those failures. And just as another side note, Third Stage is completely unaffiliated with IFS and any other software vendor that we might discuss or have on the show in the future. I will admit that I will probably bait Darren more into talking about IFS simply because a lot of people don't know much about IFS. So I do want to talk about IFS maybe more than I typically would ask for guests on the show. They're coming from software vendors. So with that all being said, Darren, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Eric. It's good to be on the program.
Yeah, absolutely. You're a first-time guest, and I really appreciate having you here, and excited to have you here today, largely because you have such a broad and diverse background in this industry, and I think you have some really good insights for us related to that. But maybe before we jump into some of the questions that we all have for you, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll come back and ask you a little bit more about IFS as well.
Sure. So my name is Darren Roos. I've been doing this enterprise software gig for going on 17 years now. Originally from South Africa, as you can hear from my accent, although I've been in the UK now for 12 years. And over the last 12 years, I've worked for 3 companies. First into my career was with Software AG, German middleware software company, you probably know. And then I did 4 years with SAP, ultimately running the global cloud ERP business. And then I've been CEO at IFS for the last 5 years.
Great. Yeah, so that you see, you've grown up in the space as well, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of interesting developments that we'll kind of cover here today as we talk about trends in the future of the enterprise tech space. But tell us a little bit about IFS Software for those that haven't heard of the technology or just aren't familiar with the company. Maybe tell us a little bit about the company.
Yeah, so IFS is an enterprise software company. We focus on customers in the upper mid-market and enterprise space. And we sell a set of solutions that are very focused on asset and service-centric industries. So thinking anything that has a bunch of assets or a lot of service. So it could be oil and gas, construction, telco, engineering, utilities, et cetera, et cetera. And the solutions that we sell are predominantly clustered, I would say, into 3 categories, which the traditional analysts would recognize as ERP, field service management, and enterprise asset management. But really, why we're as successful as we are is really in the intersection of those 3 things, because we provide ERP, EAM, and FSM on a single platform. So for those of you that do know us, you'll know that we're the Gartner Magic Quadrant leader for field service management. We're a leader for asset management. And in our asset and service-centric industries, we're also a leader for ERP. So it's really our ability to give customers the best of each of those capabilities as it relates specifically to their industry that has been such a big contributor to our success. We're just over $1 billion in revenue, and we have been around for over 30 years. But yeah, that's IFS in a nutshell.
Great.
And Eric had warned me that he might drop off, so I'll just carry on talking until he rejoins. And
the key. Oh, you're back. We lost you for a second there.
You dropped off, Eric, but you're back.
One of us dropped. I don't know. Hopefully the audience can still hear us okay. I was going to say the one of the interesting things about IFS that we'll get to throughout this discussion is that the product has a lot of strengths that are the weaknesses of other ERP systems and a lot of sort of edge capabilities and industry-specific functions. So we'll get to that here in a second. But before I do that, though, actually, before I dive into anything ERP-related or digital transformation-related, I just have to ask you a question on a maybe more of a personal level. You're also the co-founder of a nonprofit called Inner Wings, which you and I didn't talk about this as we were prepping for the discussion, but I saw it on your LinkedIn, and I thought, you know what, I want to ask you about that because it sounds really interesting, and I'd just love to hear more about just what is Inner Wings and sort of what is your involvement there with the nonprofit.
So, it's a passion project that my wife and I started a couple of years ago, and I think some of you may or may not know my wife. She's the CEO of SUSE, the open source company, Melissa. And Melissa and I started the charity a couple of years ago, and I think growing up in the enterprise software space, we see that it's super difficult for women, and we see the disparity from a gender equality perspective. So we started Inner Wings, and what Inner Wings does is it really focuses on addressing the gender bias topic in young girls, aged kind of 6 to 12 years old. And what we know from science is that 6 to 12 year age gap or group rather is where the stereotypes are kind of embedded. So Inner Wings goes into schools. We do a bunch of work with schools in a number of countries focused on getting young girls to recognize that they can do anything, be anything that they want. They don't have to be nurses and flight attendants. They can be doctors and pilots. And that's the work that Inner Wings does. And we're immensely proud of what we do. And yeah, that's Inner Wings.
Very cool. Yeah, so you're more than just an enterprise tech guy. You're also giving back to the community and doing some passionate things on the side as well.
Absolutely. And we have 3 kids, and one of which is a young girl. And I think you see the disparity, and most of your listeners will have kids, and they'll recognize that challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, good. Well, that's super interesting. And just as a side note, where if someone wanted to learn more about Innerwings, where would they go? Do you have a website or something that they could go check out?
Go to innerwings.org, absolutely, and we'd love them to.
Right, absolutely. Well, good. Well, so shifting gears then back to the digital transformation and sort of the topic here today of the fallacies of ERP software and digital transformation. Just sort of transitioning into that conversation, I guess maybe to start. Let me back up for a second. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on the show is not only because you're the CEO of a prominent software company here in the space, but also because the type of software that IFS provides is quite a bit different than other ERP vendors, and it sort of provides just a different approach to enterprise technology. And you yourself you're not only the CEO of IFS now, but you, as you mentioned, you also worked with SAP and Software AG. I think you had some time in Diginomica as well.
Yes.
So you've worked with multiple solutions throughout the years, and I guess I'd be curious to hear, how is IFS different from other ERP solutions in the marketplace, or how would you consider it different from those systems that you've worked directly for and with, and other systems as well?
Yeah, so I sat on the board of Diginomica for a while when EQT, who was a private equity firm that owned IFS, when they acquired Diginomica, I sat on the board during the acquisition phase, and then I also sat on the board of Sitecore, just as an aside. Yeah, so I've been in the space for quite a while, and I think when I came to IFS coming out of SAP, what I recognized was that there was definitely a gap where customers wanted to not have to face this difficult challenge between best of breed, where they could find a solution that had the functional depth that they wanted, and best of suite, where they could get something that was integrated and would give them the benefit of an integrated solution. And for a long time, with the discussion around composable ERP, customers have been, I guess, told that they have to choose between these two things. You can either have the functional richness, or you can have an integrated solution. And the reality is that there is another dimension, a dimension where you can get the functional richness and the integrated capability, but then the software vendor has to compromise by being industry focused. And that's effectively what IFS has done. So when you look at our competitive landscape or our peers, then the likes of Oracle or SAP or Microsoft, they all provide horizontal ERP solutions where they're catering for a very broad subset of industries. All of the industries are served. And the reality is that when you're building a solution, an enterprise business solution that needs to be deployed in a bank and a healthcare provider and a manufacturer, then there's going to be a lot of capability that is just surplus to requirements, or capability that's not there. And then, that then falls on the ecosystem to try and build it bespoke for the customer. But when you're building an ERP that is only for industries where your capability is required, in other words, these asset and service-centric industries that I mentioned, then we're able to build capability that enables them to get the best of breed, but in an integrated solution. Single data model, single UX, no disparate databases and release cycles to deal with.
Right. Yeah. And I think that's one of the interesting things about IFS is that it, as you mentioned, it's not trying to be everything to everyone. It's focused on specific industries, specific functions. And I think that really is a key differentiator, because you look at SAP, Oracle, Microsoft, just to pick on a few, vendors in the space, they are trying to be everything to everyone, and you're just going to get a watered down solution, especially if you're in a highly complex or a unique industry like a field service or asset intensive sort of industry that you mentioned.
Well, I think what's tended to happen then over time is that customers tend to then stick with them for a subset of the capability. So, I don't think that too many people would argue that SAP's finance solution is a compromised functional solution. They have fantastic capability, and if they sold, FSA finance standalone, then it would be a best of breed finance solution. Right. And I think that that's effectively what's happening now, is that customers are then choosing to exploit this composable enterprise option by then taking a bit from their horizontal ERP provider and then going out and buying best of breed apps that then will make their full function solution. Now, the challenge with that scenario is that if you're if you're Volkswagen or BASF, or, you're a very, very large company and you have thousands of people in IT, then that's okay, because the integration and the complex release cycles and critically securing those disparate applications is something that you have the capacity to do. But if you're an organization with 500 million in revenue, or $1 billion in revenue, or 2 billion in revenue, you probably only have a couple of hundred people in IT, and then you don't have the capacity to do that. And unfortunately, the industry has sold this idea that with APIs and with native cloud integration, that you can just plug them in and it'll just work. Right. And unfortunately, for anybody who's done an SAP project with Salesforce or Workday or Coupa and try to just plug them in using a native cloud integration vendor, they'll know the reality of that scenario.
Right. Yeah, and that's something you and I have talked about too, is that, in this space, even vendors that are selling or alleging to sell integrated solutions, really those solutions oftentimes are not as integrated as they seem. And that's something we see a lot, like with SAP recently, with their over the last decade or so, with their acquisition-minded approach. They've gone out and acquired SuccessFactors and Ariba and other point solutions that are third-party solutions, but it just so happens that SAP owns them, but they're still not integrated solutions with S/4HANA, their core flagship product. And other vendors are doing the same sort of thing. Is that something you're seeing, or is that something you're trying to counter with IFS's strategy? Or
well, I think at the end of the day, I just put my customer hat on, and I think that there are a bunch of customers for which SAP is absolutely the right solution. But there is a group of customers where perhaps they would want the benefit of the integrated solution, and then obviously they're struggling with the reality of when SAP bought Concur, or they bought Ariba, or they bought Fieldglass, or they have S4. All of those have invoicing capability, as an example. And then where do you do the invoicing from? Right. How do you navigate that complexity? And that's just the reality. But as I say, there are a bunch of customers that is okay. That doesn't matter, because they do have the capacity to solve that complexity. But where IFS is in our sweet spot is in that customer who is saying, I need a robust HR solution. I don't need Workday or SuccessFactors. I need a strong solution, and IFS has that. And I need a strong, solid CRM solution. I don't need Salesforce.com, and IFS has that. And I need my procurement and my distribution, my transportation management, my finance. I want all of those things, but I don't want to have to worry about the integration. I want it in the cloud. And I don't want to have to deal with users facing different user interfaces. I don't have to worry about the integration. I don't want to worry about managing different databases and so on. And that's the sweet spot for us. And it's a much greater level of functional depth than any of our peers provide. So it's not what a Microsoft or somebody like that would do. And we focus. There's a question I can't help but answer it. Ghassan from Kuwait has asked what industry. So aerospace and defense is a big industry for us. It's our single biggest industry. Energy and utilities, construction and engineering, manufacturing, and then service industries like engineering and telco and so on.
Right. Yeah. Great question. I was getting ready to cue that up, so you beat me to the punch there. And speaking of our audience too, by the way, just before I get to some follow-on questions from that comment you just had, Darren, I just want to turn to the audience here and sort of acknowledge where a lot of people are joining from here today. We have Ghassan from Kuwait, Sam from Spain, Ryan from Denver, Malcolm from the UK, Zishan from Pakistan, TJ from Wisconsin, among others, Chris from Dublin. We have Third Stage Consulting Group on the line as well. Another person from Kuwait, Sultan from Oman. So just a few examples of where people are joining from today. It's always interesting because I feel like we get, even though I'm based in the United States, we don't get as many people from the United States as we do elsewhere in the world. So it's great to see such a global audience here today for the discussion. So you just answered the question that I was going to have, which was the vertical, which industry verticals does IFS focus on. I guess to shift gears though and look at the overall enterprise tech space. You've talked about this sort of what do you call it? The dichotomy between the single ERP systems and the the more focused point solutions. And I think what we're covering here today, or what we're seeing in other vendors such as IFS, is that you're covering that middle ground. It's sort of like you're not a best of breed provider, but you're not a one size fits all, trying to be everything to everyone sort of solution. You're sort of in that middle ground. Is that a fair summary of where you see yourselves?
Yeah, I think that if it was a Venn diagram, you'd have proponents of best of suite only. You'd have proponents of best of breed, and I like to think that the solutions that we provide, specifically in the area of field service and enterprise asset management, are the two best solutions on the market. So there is no better field service management solution, and there is no better enterprise asset management solution. If you look at the industries that we serve, they're all industries where enterprise asset management and field service management are really critical to the success of those organizations. So, yes, absolutely. In that intersection of the two.
We're here with Darren Roos, the CEO of IFS Software, having a conversation about fallacies and misconceptions related to digital transformation. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings. And the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. We're here with Darren Roos from IFS Software talking about common fallacies and misconceptions about digital transformation. So overall, then, what do you see as some of the biggest trends that are emerging in the enterprise tech space?
It's interesting because when I read it, I thought, there's obviously been a huge shift to the cloud. And in fact, I think Sam asked the question, does that mean that everything has to move to the cloud, or is it a fallacy that everything has moved to the cloud? And I'll answer the question at the same time, which is absolutely, we do not believe that everything should move to the cloud. I think that there are use cases which lend themselves really well to the cloud, and customer situations are all very different. And actually, IFS's philosophy is that we provide a solution which is called IFS Cloud, but it can be deployed as a remote option, which is effectively an on-prem instance. And then what we do is that we update that on-prem instance like it is in the cloud. So a customer can put it in their own environment. They can put it into a system integrator's environment. They can put it onto a hyperscaler, and we update it like a normal cloud application, but run as a remote instance. And so we're a big believer in hybrid cloud and giving customers that choice. So I think the cloud is obviously a trend that continues, but I think a much greater practicality around what should be in the cloud and what shouldn't, and the role that hybrid cloud plays. And then obviously we see a continued move towards automation. We continue to see a huge push towards greater analytics. And in times like today, whether it's supply chain visibility or customer visibility, analytics and data is so important. But actually, the thing that struck me, Eric, when I was reading that question, was just how the fundamentals of what customers are looking for hasn't changed at all. Right. And at the end of the day, what they're looking for, and having spoken to many customers in my 17 years of doing this, is that they're looking for solutions that are, let's take functional capability as a ticket to the game. The solution has to be able to do it. That's important. But it has to be easy to use. It has to be easy to deploy. and it has to have a lower total cost of ownership or an improved value ROI. And ultimately, that's what we continue to push to do, is to try and make it easier to deploy, make it easier to use for users, and focus on bringing down that total cost of ownership. And in the enterprise application space, that is evergreen, right? That's the holy grail. And unfortunately, it's not a destination; it is a continuum. And we continue to focus on that. And it's interesting because so many vendors continue to talk about artificial intelligence, and they continue to talk about augmented reality, and they continue to talk about a bunch of technologies, which in my opinion, those technologies just have to be embedded in the application. Customers don't want to hear about another thing that they need to buy that gets added on. They just expect us as vendors to make it available, and we should just make it available, but we should always be striving to focus on those three things, I believe. So easier to use, easier to deploy, lower total cost of ownership. And that is, for 17 years, that's what customers have been telling me is most important to them. And that hasn't changed at all.
Right. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear you say that. And I was actually, as you were describing that, I was thinking, it sounds so simple, so easy, so basic. But I think a lot of software vendors and industry consultants, I think we miss that a lot. Like, let's not worry about AI and augmented reality and the metaverse and blockchain and all that stuff quite yet. Let's just get the fundamentals down and let's figure that piece out. And then we can sort of from there layer on some of the more advanced emerging technologies. But a lot of times we want to go backwards.
Just to be clear, I think that as we engage with our customers and our partners on, where do we take the product and what do we do, making sure that emerging technologies become embedded is a critical part of our development lifecycle. If you look at what IFS has released over the last few years, we have significant examples of all of those technologies in use by customers today. But that's not that isn't what the talk track is about, because ultimately the customer wants to understand how they're going to be able to tangibly derive value from it. But too many vendors have for too long become more focused on how are they going to convince their customers to take advantage of those things while neglecting the really important things which customers are worried about. So you're right. I think not often enough are we focused on those things.
Absolutely. And just to build on that, the whole thread that we were just talking about, this is another question from Ghassan. And by the way, Ghassan is one of our regulars on this live stream, and I'd say he's a tough crowd. He's not an easy person to please. So this is pretty glowing praise from him, I'd say. But he says he worked with IFS for 10 years, thumbs up to Sweden for the innovation built into IFS. And I guess I want to maybe counter what you just said, which is, you focus on the basics, get the automation in place and sort of some of the more fundamental, less sexy sorts of approaches to technology. How do you balance that, though, the core fundamentals with providing innovation and sort of pushing the boundaries and the capabilities of the software? What's been your approach, or what have you seen work there?
Again, it comes back to focus. And I think that when we, I was on the board of another software company for a while, and I unashamedly stole this idea from them of being really, the term they used was customer-driven innovation. And a lot of vendors talk about customer-driven innovation, but the reality is that 80-90% of the ideas that they come up with come from their own engineering teams. And that's something that I've really focused on us not doing, where we've really brought rigor to how do we ensure that what we're building is what our customers are asking us for, and making sure that we're effectively crowdsourcing that requirement. And then you don't end up with a situation where a large proportion of what you're building sounds great to the engineering folks that built it, but actually the customer's going, but I don't need this function. And that's very, very common. And I can tell you, I've seen in many of the companies, I've only worked in 3 now, but they acquired companies where that was a disease almost, where customers would be complaining about system reliability and uptime, while hundreds of new functions that nobody was using were being released, and that's a very unhealthy situation, but one that's very common.
Yeah, very interesting. And I think that's the key is that, really understanding what your business needs are, your requirements, what are your goals and objectives as an organization, and how can technology fit into that. And I think too often we look for that silver bullet. We turn to the sexy technologies thinking if I just deploy AI and machine learning, that's going to make my business better. Well, it may be, but it's not going to if you don't get that core fundamental stuff in place, like just basic automation and integrated workflows and all that good stuff.
And it is, look, I don't want to make it sound like we're, we get it perfect. We equally struggle with this. Look, at the end of the day, we have 3,000 odd customers around the world, 3,000 enterprise customers. While we are very focused on those industries that I highlighted before, and a lot of the processes are common, the way in which they think about assets and the service of those assets is common. You still have divergent requirements, and finding the compromises on how you take care of them is particularly important. I think the biggest challenge in our world is, when you have a customer that says, I know someone who's done a service management or an ERP project with you. They were super happy. We'd like to talk to you about it. And we have to say, well, look, actually, you're a retailer. And the answer is no. That's not a path we're going to go down. That tends to be the biggest challenge for my teams. But, we stay modest, we stay humble, and just focus on trying to be the best that we can in the space that we're in.
Right. Now, we've talked quite a bit, and we actually on this podcast, by the way, have talked quite a bit about this whole debate of, single ERP system versus multiple solutions or best of breed. In fact, just in last week's podcast episode, which is episode number 102, we had a guest on who was talking about best of breed and sort of the pros and cons of that approach. So if you haven't listened to episode 102, just go back to Transformation Ground Control episode 102, and you can hear that full discussion. But I would love to hear as a follow-up to that, even though you may not have heard that conversation, what do you see as the biggest pros and cons of single ERP software versus the more composable ERP or the best of breed ERP?
I think the challenge comes when customers are trying to, go down the route of capturing the benefit of a best of breed solution, but without understanding the complexity of what that fragmented landscape is going to bring. And I think that unfortunately, and I think somebody asked the question earlier about, how do you counteract this? But vendors are going to tell you this is easy. They're good. And we've had loads of cases where a customer will buy. They'll go, I don't want to throw a specific vendor under the bus, but they'll buy a traditional best of breed solution for procurement or HR or CRM, who the vendors are. And then they'll select IFS as the ERP. And then they'll say, okay, now you IFS need to integrate to this vendor. And we go, but hang on, we're 80% of the landscape. They're 20% of the landscape. Why are you asking us to do this? And the answer is because that vendor does not have an answer. And now when they do that, that's okay, because we are architected to be able to do that, and we are used to working with other vendors in that way. But the problem is that when they go best of breed HR, best of breed procurement, best of breed contingent labor, best of breed procurement, and then a customer with a relatively small IT department is then faced with the challenge of how am I going to get this to work together? I mean, that's a disaster. And we see a lot of those. And we've been into a bunch of customers where we've gone in and they've had a fairly fragmented landscape, a couple of those best of breed vendors, and then they end up taking them out and replacing them. But that's a huge expenditure that, and time to value that they've wasted. So I think that's probably the most common mistake that I see. I think that's the answer.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. And how do you, if you're a buyer, if I'm an enterprise tech buyer, I'm on an evaluation team that's really considering some ERP systems that are going to be potentials for my organization. How do I see through that? How do I vet that out? Fully integrated, the false messaging, if you will, that the solution is fully integrated when it's not. How do I vet that out, or what are some tactics you've seen that you've seen work?
References are so important, and I think taking the time to meet with the references, talk to them about the experience that they've had, The enterprise, your listeners will be savvy in this space. I was chatting to a customer of ours in the US that builds pools. They're a very large US swimming pool manufacturer installer, and we were talking about the fact that when they put in a pool, the process is that they come to your home, they dig a bloody great hole. There's a huge pile of dirt, and for a while it's very messy, and unfortunately there's no other way to build a pool. You know what I mean? Digging that hole and having the dirt there is just the reality. And unfortunately, enterprise business solutions, what we do, whether it's a very large integration project or a very large ERP project, they're a bit like that. There is a process where it's uncomfortable. And the organization, especially if you're going to do it well, where you want to drive fit to standard, you want to make sure that you're adopting the processes as they're intended, that process can be very uncomfortable for an organization. And there is no super simple, easy way to do it. It's going to be somewhat organizationally painful. And I think that just accepting that and finding a partner, and I use the word partner because you can't approach it as a vendor. You have to recognize this is a marriage. There are going to be compromises, puts and takes, and talking to references that describe that relationship. One in which they've partnered with the vendor, and when there have been challenges that they've solved them together, talk through those challenges, make sure that you're really exploring what worked, what didn't work, how did the vendor respond when things didn't go well. Because if you get on a reference call and the customer just tells you everything was perfect, that's not a real reference call.
Right. Yeah, you want to get to the gory details, the good, the bad, the ugly, all that stuff. And Ghassan has a good follow-up here is to sort of answer or build on the question of what are the advantages and disadvantages of best of breed versus single ERP. And he makes the comment that there's challenges to best of breed solutions that include integration and security and multiple versions of the truth. I think security is a really interesting one because that sort of exposes you to more vulnerabilities or more potential openings for an outside actor to hack into your systems. But any thoughts or comments on this comment here from Ghassan?
100%. I think I'm obviously the CEO of an enterprise software company and we build and sell and implement software, but I also run $1 billion business. And that means that I have 5,500 employees now and a bunch of customers that I need to secure. And that means that I think about cybersecurity a lot. And there is no question that the more fragmented your landscape is, the more points of entry there are for bad actors. I think that, if you go back to, 10 years ago, people used to think about shadow IT as a problem in the context of spend. But the reality is that, the problem now is security. And the threat of cybersecurity today is not that it will cost you some money. The threat is that it can absolutely destroy your business. And it doesn't matter who you are. Any business can be completely debilitated if that is not handled well. And there's no question that the more fragmented and disparate your IT stack is, the more applications you have, the more potential threats there are.
Right. Yeah, that's a great point. Here's a question from Sam Graham on LinkedIn, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. I don't believe you and I have ever discussed this, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Darren. But do many companies still see ERP and digital transformation as being technology projects?
It's interesting. I think that yes, there are still a bunch that see them as technology projects. I reviewed a prospect of ours this morning, where large company, very big digital transformation project, not a single executive involved in the project, which is astounding to me. And I think that the way companies should be thinking about it is that the idea that you would think about a digital strategy or a digital transformation strategy is actually a bit of a misnomer. There is just the strategy, because any company today that is not thinking about their strategy with a digital enablement they will not succeed. And I think that that's super, super important. So, definitely companies still doing it, Sam, as incredible as that sounds. And I tell you what, my comment to the team was, I think we need to think long and hard about whether we compete for this business, because if we are successful, the likelihood that it will fail is incredibly high. Right now, I'm not worried that we lose the business. I'm worried we win it, because if we win this business and there is no executive ownership, no executive sponsorship on this project, it will fail. But we see it still incredibly.
Yeah, it doesn't matter how great the software is, how well it's built, designed, deployed. If the executives aren't on board, that's going to be a recipe for disaster. And actually, related to that, this is a good question from Chris over on LinkedIn. Chris asks, are all software vendors so similar that the strength of the implementation is now the most significant difference? You just talked about executive buy-in and how important that is during implementation, and how that can derail an implementation even if you have great software. But in general, do you agree with this comment, or do you have any thoughts here? Are software vendors being similar, that it really just comes down to the implementation?
I think the statement has some truth to it, but with a very large caveat, which is we quite often are dealing with projects where, because of the asset and service nature of the customer, the statement all vendors have the capability to do this is just not factually accurate. And it's actually quite a dangerous narrative in that context specifically, because a bunch of vendors today just don't have that capability, especially when you're talking about vendors that have dealt predominantly with what I would call administrative ERP in the past. But there are a bunch of organizations who do require administrative ERP solutions. And at that point, you're 100% right. Whether they, if you're I don't know, if you're an organization that doesn't have a bunch of assets and service centric requirements, or you're looking for a solution, then it comes down predominantly to the implementation. I agree, and maybe not just the implementation, but I'm a bit, as you'll have heard from this, I'm a huge proponent of that vendor customer relationship, and I think if you procure at arm's length, and you then find an implementation partner and you try and go off and do this without the vendor's guidance to make sure that the application is being used to its fullest extent, and you're making sure the system integrator isn't building capability that's on the roadmap for the release that you're actually going to go live on, or they're building stuff that actually the vendor intended to be done in a different way. Keeping that tri-party arrangement very tight is super important, and making sure that you've got references that are very relevant, so that you know that the functional capability is there without a bunch of customization from the system integrator.
Right. Yeah. Great point. And I think it's, you really have to have both. I agree with your caveat. You have to have good software that fits and aligns with your business needs, but you also have to have a strong implementation, and it's price of admission, to use your phrase from before. The price of admission is a software that's going to work and fit your business. Now, to actually realize that value, you're going to have to make sure you implement it well. That's a great point there. So I want to get to this question that I just lost. Where did it go? Here it is. So this is from Ratna on LinkedIn. Says that she loves the analogy of the swimming pool, having done this as a project manager. Although I don't think you meant it as an analogy. I guess it sort of is an analogy, because it actually was a swimming pool client that you were talking about.
No, but I meant it as an analogy too.
Right. But I like where she's going with this. There, she says this perfectly describes the plunge organizations will undertake. Nice description for upper management executives, this message, so they give space and, more importantly, supports for success. I had to take the question off to be able to read the rest of it off the screen here. So any thoughts there as far as just maybe coming back to that executive ownership thread and why that's so important to the success?
Yeah, I mean, look, I'd been, when I came to IFS, I'd been involved in the ERP space for my time at SAP. As I said, I ran the global ERP business. I was involved with dozens of customers in projects, but I'd never implemented an ERP solution for myself. And when we came to IFS historically had been quite fragmented, and we had a number of instances of IFS, but it was effectively a very fragmented, multiple versions, highly customized because of the decentralized approach. When I came in as CEO, we made the decision to implement our own software on the latest version, brand new, greenfields implementation. And my own CIO, a guy called Sal Laher, who is an industry veteran and has been around ERP for many decades outside of IFS. It was an interesting journey for me as a CEO to go on with Sal as my CIO, almost, teaching me what it was like to do it ourselves, really, drinking our own champagne or eating our own dog food, depending on which analogy you want to use. And it was very, very interesting. The number of conversations I was involved in where I would have a business user saying, I need this capability to go live. And Sal was saying, no, you don't. We can do it in this way. We need to go live as we'd planned. And then we will iterate through the coming releases in order to get you what you need. But we can absolutely manage it. And I had many, many of those discussions through the implementation. And the result was that we did a full implementation of IFS. At the time, we were maybe 700 million in revenue, operating in 50 odd countries. We did a full implementation, including HR, CRM, finance, procurement. We did the entire project in 6 months, from the start of the project to full go live, big bang go live in 6 months. And it was about those compromises. It was about interrogating those decisions. And without my sponsorship, it would never have happened. It really took me as the CEO going into those sessions and going, let's listen to what both of you are saying, and going, okay, look, that can wait for the next release. And that's what we did. We then iterated through the coming releases, but we got the go live. As is always the case, 80% of the value was in that first go live, and the project was hugely successful. And the trick is to try and make sure that we push for that executive sponsorship, and drive that kind of 80% of the value from the first 20% of the project.
We're here with Darren Roos, the CEO of IFS Software, having a conversation about fallacies and misconceptions related to digital transformation. We've got a lot more to cover. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. We're here at Darren Roos from IFS Software talking about common fallacies and misconceptions about digital transformation. And just building on this, by the way, we have a series of industry heavy hitters that are rolling into the stream here, so I've got to get to their questions. One is Peter Robinson, who I've known of for a while now. But Peter's comment for you, Darren, is I think it's so refreshing and telling to hear a vendor CEO state that he will consider walking away from a prospective client because of the risk of failure that lies on the client side. Too many end users abdicate all responsibility for their digital transformation to their vendor and system integrator. So I think that's a good point. And I think that's a key thing that he's hitting on, though, that maybe goes a bit further than what you were saying, Darren, which is you have to have executive buy-in and support. But it's also not just having executive buy-in and support for support's sake. It's also just taking ownership and control of the project and not abdicating responsibility to your outside third parties. And I think that's really tempting for a lot of organizations to say, Darren, you've got a solution that's going to help my business. I trust you. You're the expert. Just sort of go figure this out for me and help me just go put the technology in and make my business better. It sounds easy, right? But it usually doesn't work that way.
It's interesting because if you think about the origins of ERP and the business process re-engineering that was a precursor to your first generation of ERP projects, it's almost a new thing where we outsource this responsibility to the vendor and the system integrator. That's not where it started. It started with companies looking at their own processes and really focusing on optimization as a first phase, and then getting technology as an enabler. And then unfortunately, the Wild West emerged, and we got, the multi-billion ERP projects, where the money was made by system integrators that were effectively rewriting the application and taking it from being a COTS solution to being something that was almost unrecognizable. And that's where, you had a generation of failures. And now we're moving back towards, something that is much more fit to standard and custom off the shelf. But that doesn't mean that the business isn't responsible. And it is super important that the business is working on streamlining those processes to make sure that it fits, that there is a meeting of the application and the business processes.
Right, absolutely. And John Reed is on the line. I don't know if you know John, but he's from Diginomica, a very well-known influencer in the space. His comment for Peter that asked that previous question is bingo. There's absolutely a customer responsibility that is often overlooked. And I want to segue into a question from another industry heavy hitter that is all related here. This is from Marcus Harris, who's a software licensing attorney at Taft Law, someone who's been on the show multiple times on this podcast. But his question is, how do you ensure tight vendor management when the customer is inexperienced with implementing software and probably hasn't done an implementation in years? So you've got these executives that think that they can just abdicate responsibility to you or any other software vendor. How do you get that point across to an organization when they haven't done this before and they don't really know what they're doing necessarily?
Yeah, so I think it comes down to two things. One is that something that was done a lot in the industry, again, early on, and I think most vendors would say they still have a practice, but in reality, that it's been eroded, certainly from a quality and capability perspective, is this idea of value engineering and making sure that going into the project that there is clarity on where the value is coming from, whether that value is efficiency or revenue, increased revenue or risk mitigation, whatever it is, that there is a clear value statement and that there is a tight correlation between that value statement and how specifically the application is going to deliver that value. And we do that. And then I think what it is it's a case of making sure, and again, it's quite a manual task, I guess, for my leadership team, and they've had the experience with doing it, which is making sure that the customer is then bought into what is it going to take. And when I say the customer, I'm talking CEO, CFO, ultimate executive sponsor, that they are going to be on the hook in the steering committees, regular catch-ups. It's interesting because we, as I say, I don't want to make it sound like I think that IFS has the answer to everything. We get loads of stuff wrong, and we, as I say, we try and stay humble. But if I think about the number of CEO and CFO interactions that I have today versus what I had in my SAP days, it's very different. And what I saw was that at SAP, it was very much the center of power sat with the system integrator. And the reality is that the system integrator's incentive is to customize the application. Mm-hmm. The more customized the application is, the more hours they're going to build, the more revenue they're going to generate. But as a software vendor, as the OEM, I really want to go live and get on to the next project. That's my imperative. So we tend to push very hard on customers to say, look, if we're not getting the executive sponsorship, if we can't really get alignment on how we're going to capture this benefit, leveraging our business value engineering tooling, and we have a tool which is a digital tool, value assessment, which then goes into our scoping tool, which goes into the application. So we've got a closed loop of how are we going to create value through into the application. If we can't get the executive buy-in into that, then it might not be a customer for us, and we walk away often. And that's because a failed project is a huge challenge. We all know the numbers, right? A happy customer is going to tell far less people than an unhappy customer is going to tell.
Right. Absolutely. And just to build on that point about the closed loop, the value engineering, this is a comment from John, who, by the way, before I get to the comment, he might be as jaded or more jaded than I am and more skeptical of the industry. So this comment, I think, says a lot coming from him. But he says IFS has some of the best value engineering in the industry. Darren knows what he's talking about on this point. We need to have these type of metrics in real-time dashboards. If you can health check on your phone or watch, you must be able to do that with your project real-time as well. So, great point. I think it's, we take seriously, I'm wearing a watch right now that just told me to start breathing, by the way. I just got buzzed that I'm not breathing deep enough. I need to slow down. So I've got my watch telling me this real time that I need to breathe. But yet I'm not taking the same sort of rigor when it comes to a multi-million-dollar digital transformation that will affect my business for years to come. And I find that super interesting.
But I think the thing is that you and I was going to say you'll be amazed. You won't, because I know you've seen this, and many of your listeners and viewers will be able to relate to this. But the number of customers that undertake a project like this without a specific quantifiable business case is incredible, and we see it all the time still. And that's that's a really terrifying reality. And one that really sets them up for failure. And you have to be able to measure it. You have to have real clarity on where that value is going to come from.
Right. Yeah, I agree. So a couple of comments here. This breathing really set off some comments here. If you about breathing, Eric, you'll panic. Just relax. I'm trying to relax. I just get worked up in these conversations. It's hard for me to take a deep breath. And then Kyler says, congrats, John Reed. Means a lot coming from Eric. I don't know what that's supposed to mean, Kyler. Luckily, she works for Third Stage, so I'll ask her later what she meant by that. Here's just another comment. I'm just sort of hitting some comments that aren't necessarily questions from the audience. But Hassan says, good point in the incentive scheme that
I think it means the SAP SIs get. But it's not just an SAP thing. It is in every system integrator thing. Yes. At the end of the day, your system integrators are paid for effort, and the more effort they expend, the more money they're going to make. And that, let me be clear, I'm not bashing system integrators. We have a fantastic group of system integrators. Without our system integrators, we wouldn't be successful. They do by far the majority of our implementations. But ensuring that those system integrators are incentivized correctly and that the process of appointing them is clear is extremely important. And I think the industry's matured a lot. If you think about and Eric, I know you've spoken about this before on one of your podcasts, the biggest failures in ERP. When you look at those are previous generations, right? We're not dealing with that now. Customers are much more savvy now. And hopefully no one's making that kind of mistake.
Yeah. I'd say a lot of them are more savvy, but it's always fascinating to me how I see some of the same mistakes, the same Groundhog Day sort of repeated mistakes now that I saw when I first started in this industry 30 years ago. So I sort of agree with you. I think there is more of a savviness, and more organizations are becoming savvy, but there's still a large subset that aren't.
Maybe not quite on the same scale as the likes of SAP Miller or anything like that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that's a good point. The massive $1 billion plus failures, I think those are becoming less common, but it's the more of the moderate failures, I think, where challenges or where organizations.
But it comes down to everything that we've just discussed. It comes down to they picked the wrong tool, didn't make sure that the tool was fit for purpose, picked the wrong system integrator, didn't make sure that the vendor was still on the hook. I think those come down. No executive sponsorship. Probably the three biggest things that they can get wrong.
Right. Now here's I'd love to get your comment or maybe some thoughts on this comment from John. He's, I think, opening a potential Pandora's box here, which I like. He says it's a key point, though. SIs have a responsibility to push back on over-customized projects that accumulate tech debt. My hope is that Southwest Airlines meltdown will bring even more attention to the problem of technical debt. Maybe explain, what are your views on technical debt in general? We don't have to talk about Southwest Airlines necessarily, but just technical debt in general. What is it? Why is it so important to overcome that? And how do you navigate that whole thing in today's day and age?
Look, I think, let me just comment. I think that a lot of organizations, the scale of Southwest, and we come across a lot of them in our day-to-day operations, that they've built their IT stacks over many generations. They've come under enormous pressure, especially in recent times, to build capabilities that the moment demands. So if you think about what airlines have faced during COVID, online booking, online reservations, just a different level of service. It's become very front end loaded, and frankly, I don't think the hype cycle around CRM and what Salesforce was doing necessarily helped. So massive focus on the front end for maybe a decade now. And what's happened in that time, unfortunately, because organizations have a limit to how much capacity they have to do projects, is that the back office has struggled and has suffered. And I won't name them, but I can think of another airline that I've had some interaction with, where they are a disaster waiting. It's not Southwest. They are an absolute disaster waiting to happen, and the executives know it, and there just isn't the money and organizational capacity to fix it. And it's been okay this year, and it was okay the year before. So maybe we can eke another year out of it, and it'll be somebody else's problem, or a problem that we can face when we're not in COVID or not in an economic downturn.
Right.
And that's unfortunately the reality for loads of customers. I remember meeting with a CIO many years ago who was in a manufacturing environment. He was running an old antiquated system that was out of support. He literally sat there and he said, you know what, I go to bed every night knowing that if the system falls over, we will never get it back up again, and this business will go out of business. I couldn't believe that he was telling me this.
Yeah.
But that's the reality for some organizations. So, I think it's very, very challenging is the answer. And there's no quick fix for it, right? It is just extremely, extremely challenging.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think recognizing the risk, one of the biggest lessons from Southwest Airlines is that they apparently downplayed or didn't fully realize or understand the risk of their technical debt and their legacy systems. And they thought maybe they're saving money by staying on older systems and sweating the assets as some of those asset intensive industries will focus on. But what ends up happening is you end up spending a lot more money. I guarantee that failure cost them a lot more money than if they would have gone through a transformation or at least started to address their technical debt years ago.
If you put yourself in their shoes and the solution is a multi-year fix, it's very hard to go, I'm going to be the one to start the project. And I'm going to spend all this money knowing that we could be spending this money and it could still fall over during the project. And we're going to spend the money and, get all the trouble. So
right.
It's very hard, very, very hard. And I think there are very few, very large organizations that don't have a ton of this situation. The question is just, are they like a Southwest where, it's so much in the public domain and the impact is so public?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And people heard about it, obviously. I mean, that's a failure that affected a lot of people during the holidays. So there's a lot of emotionally charged responses, understandably, to that failure. So I guess just we could spend hours. I feel like we spent all day on this topic, but unfortunately, I don't think either you or I have the time to do that. But I would like to maybe hear your thoughts on just backing up and knowing that these fallacies exist, knowing that these misconceptions about ERP systems and digital transformations exist. What next steps or what first steps would you recommend to an organization that's thinking about a digital transformation or planning a digital transformation in 2023?
Look, I think I'm going to come back to my fundamentals, right, which is be very clear on why you're doing it. I think any digital transformation has to be underpinned by a strategy, and make sure that the technology is going to enable that strategy, and that you're very clear at a very granular, basic level why you're doing it. And I think that's what it comes back to. And I want to keep it fairly abstract at that level because it's so nuanced by industry. And maybe if we correlate it back to this technical debt question, and I think this might not be popular, but I think Southwest are a great organization, right? I think they're a really smart bunch of people. I think they do some amazing stuff, and I think that they were very unfortunate with what happened. Just as an aside,
right.
But I think that what I do see, and it's probably the biggest challenge with digital transformation, is that some customers may have some big issue over here. Maybe it's technical debt, but the digital transformation project has nothing to do with that. Now they're, how do I drive a new channel to market? Or how am I going to enable servitization? Or how am I going to, open up, my e-commerce capability? That becomes the catchy, exciting thing that people are getting excited about, and they neglect the hygiene stuff. And I think that that's very important. I think we're mature enough now that we need to recognize that we need to get a little bit past the hype cycles and the stuff that sounds sexy, and get into what is it going to take to build a healthy, robust technology platform on which you can evolve your business, because the two are so tightly linked, as was seen in the Southwest example.
Yeah, well said. And in technology and digital transformations don't have to be super sexy. I mean, they can be basic. They can be fundamental. You can focus on automation and streamlining your processes. I mean, even though some might say that's old school, we should be thinking further than that. Well, get that stuff right. And if you do that really well, then you can start thinking about all the sexy stuff after that.
You're 100%. It is like a house. You need a strong foundation, and then you evolve. And I suppose, like with any maturity index, you want to move up. You start at the bottom and move up. And the problem is that too many projects are trying to start at the top and then thinking they can fix it coming down. And it doesn't work that way, because if you can't, if you can't get stock reliably into your warehouses, or you can't keep your manufacturing facility going, then frankly, you don't need a bunch of sales. Tesla maybe is a great living example of that at the moment, where, yes, great innovative model. I'm a big Tesla fan. I own 2 of them myself. But, frankly, supply issues have been forever. So I think it's build the house from the bottom up, get the foundation right, and you will get there. But if you try and start at the end and work back, it's not going to work.
Absolutely. That's well said. And I have a great closing comment here from Sam Graham on LinkedIn. He says he hopes that Darren, as a Springbok, springs back to another session here soon. All right. Thank you, Darren. Great conversation. Good to have you on the show, and really interesting stuff. And I really appreciate how balanced that discussion was, and how Darren was not afraid to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly of digital transformations in the ERP space. In fact, we're going to unpack a few of those threads here in just a moment. We'll come right back after a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are aiming for transformation success, turn to Third Stage Consulting Group. Third Stage's independent and technology-agnostic consulting team helps clients define their digital strategies, define their roadmaps, and manage their transformations. With offices in the US, Europe, and Australia, our team helps the world's most forward-thinking organizations through their transformation pitfalls and risks. If you are embarking on a digital transformation or business change initiative, contact Third Stage Consulting to see how we can help you reach the third stage of transformation success. Learn more about us and download independent reports, videos, and other best practices at thirdstageconsulting.com.
Hello, welcome to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes every Wednesday on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, and Twitter. Thank you for being here today. We just had Darren Roos on the show, the CEO of IFS Software. We talk about misconceptions and fallacies in the digital transformation and ERP software space. What were some of your takeaways from that conversation, Kyler?
Well, one of my biggest takeaways, which is probably not what you're expecting, was just the overall great message of the Inner Wings Foundation that he mentioned, that he founded with, I believe, his wife. So if you haven't looked at that, I actually spent some time this morning checking it out, bought some books for my own daughter. So it's a great message to be able to, they're on Amazon, shameless plug once again, and authored by the organization, and have such a great core message. So I think that's a really beautiful cause to be involved in. And he's one of our only guests that has really ever mentioned a nonprofit outside of being a CEO of a global company, which usually people lead with that. So I think that was wonderful that he kind of layered that in. So just a little bit of plug for that is definitely go check it out and see some of the great resources they have there for just overall girls in STEM and young children in STEM as well.
That's awesome. I didn't know they had books and stuff like that available, so that's good to know.
Yeah, they have a couple of them. We bought the Magic Box, so we'll come back with a book review because I know everyone's interested in my opinion. No, I'm sure it's excellent. But we went ahead and bought some because it's a important cause, certainly. But overall, kind of switching gears to talk about the overall content of the interview, I think it's a great conversation and a very refreshing outlook that we see from our vendor partners to understand their overall own biases. And I think a lot of people were struck by his comments, Darren's, overall insight around some people don't match the software. Some organizations don't match the functionalities, and having the power to say that and being okay with saying that is something that's so important for the overall success of not only IFS, but also for business organizations. And it's something, a line of conversation and a narrative that we don't often have. Many times our client community engages an independent third-party partner like Third Stage because there's that lack of transparency and a need for almost an overall audit of understanding if it is a good fit.
Right. Yeah, it's very true. And I think back to the question we talked about in the opening segment, the audience questions, that is a common bias in the space, is just, that bias is hard to see through. And if you don't have any counterpoints or any unbiased or objective opinions about what you should do and how you should go about your transformation, you're going to go with the only option you have, which is going to be the biased answer.
Absolutely. And understanding your overall competencies in an industry, like Darren mentioned, aerospace and defense, for example, and IFS competencies in that overall industry, that's also really important so that you can understand where to best support and kind of grow out that overall network.
Yeah, absolutely.
I wonder how do you go about picking the CEOs from software industry? Because just a little look behind the curtain, Eric has a lot of people asking specifically in the software space to be able to speak to his audience. So I wonder if you could kind of give us some insight in how you vet those guests to make sure they're a good match and they're going to have transparency. Like Darren did an excellent job of having that overall lens and insight on this interview.
Yeah, it's it started off with the CEO of Odoo, and I wanted to have him on the show just because he's a really interesting person, and I had met him before, talked to him before. I think the product's really interesting, so it was just I sort of tested it out with him because I thought, people that listen to this show and watch my YouTube channel seem to be really interested in Odoo and open source software, so I thought, why not have one of the pioneers of that on the show. And then Lisa Pope, who's the president of Epicor Software, being the second one. I just knew her. I've known her for a long time, and we sort of hovered in the same orbit for 20 some years, both being in the same industry. And then with Darren, I didn't know Darren really before having him on the show, but I had seen him speak at an IFS conference. I try to go to a couple vendor conferences each year just to, keep my axe sharp, if you will, understanding what's going on with the software vendors. And a couple of years ago, I went to the IFS conference and he spoke, and I just thought he's a really good speaker. And I really liked how he didn't really sugarcoat things. I always felt like, even at the conference where his job is to promote IFS and to talk about how great IFS is, he did a great job of that. But he also talked about what they're not good at. And he's really candid and transparent about, we're not a good fit for everyone. Here's where we're a good fit. Here's where we're not. And I really appreciated that. And so I felt like he would be a good sort of transparent or honest guest to have. And so, yeah, I would love to have more guests on the show that meet those criteria. In particular, Larry Ellison, who I'm at least 2 to 3% sure is not watching or is watching the show. But
him and Elon Musk are watching it together for sure. They're
having a watch
party.
They're having a watch party at Elon's mansion in wherever he lives, and I'm sure. But I would love to have both of them on the show. But Larry Ellison is my one I'm determined to get him on the show at some point. It might take a year or two and might take millions of views of this show before he'll consider it. But I would love to have, I just like to have interesting CEOs that have diverse perspectives. And again, as long as we're not turning into a commercial for any one software, I'm comfortable with just about anyone that kind of has something to say.
And I would say we talk a lot about executive and company alignment and how that really starts from a top-down approach. When we deal with IFS team members, they often take the same approach of wanting to support our overall content, support our ability to, bring out a message from an industry perspective. And usually we don't get that. Usually we get this is wrong, or you're wrong about this, or all of these different hate mail from our vendor partners. But the IFS team seems to have the same thing, the same sort of mindset and approach that Darren talked about in offering a service and a value of support via, their system, as opposed to an aggressive nature of kind of shoving it down a business's pipeline through different types of really aggressive sales messaging.
Yeah. Yeah. And the thing that, great point. And back to when I first met or was exposed to Darren at that conference a couple of years ago, the thing that stuck out and the thing that really resonated with me was how he was so not flippant, but he was kind of flippant about cloud versus on-prem. He didn't seem to really care. He even said in the presentation I saw, he said, we don't care what our customers do, whether they're on-prem or cloud or some sort of hybrid. He's like, we just want what's best for the client, and we'll sell you software in either model. Whereas, and that runs counter to what a lot of vendors are doing now, which is we are going to push the heck out of the cloud systems. We're going to stop paying commission to our sales reps on anything that's not cloud-based. We're going to, sort of disparage just the whole idea of on-premise gets disparaged by, some of these big cloud providers and the industry analysts that they pay to do the same. So you end up hearing this negative messaging around on-prem and how cloud's the future. And if you're not on cloud, you're dying and all this stuff. Whereas he came out and said, maybe it's the right thing for you. Maybe it's not, but whatever you want, we've got different deployment options. So I think that flexibility and that back to that hybrid concept in the opening segment that you talked about, I think that's all really important. You need to have that flexibility and multiple options.
Yeah, and just the overall intention of being dedicated to the business's goals, not your sales goals or your new system that, your overall stakeholders are trying to get more money around. I think that makes a lot of sense. Something that I wanted to just bring up as a trend from both Darren and then Brad Feeks, as we mentioned, that was last week's episode, around best of breed and specifically integrations. Something that they both kind of said is now everything is best of breed because of not only the acquisitions of, the smaller companies into the bigger companies, but also just understanding that there's no one system anymore, and there needs to be an interoperability strategy behind all of those. And it's almost interesting because we were having this argument of like which one should you go with, and now it seems to be you should go with integration and interoperability, but with the lens of, to quote Clifford Martin from our Third Stage Africa and EMEA team, is with a professional skepticism to know that integration plan might not be fully baked on the system integrator or vendor side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a good point, and I think the big players will continue to acquire the smaller players. But what that's going to do is, yes, it's going to create more scale and size for the large vendors, the large ERP providers, but it's also going to create more of a best of breed model within those vendors. And so that while they may be saying that they're selling a single integrated system, they're really not. And that was part of what Darren and I talked about was how do you see past that messaging around saying that it's a single integrated system when really it's not. So I think you're going to see more and more of that. SAP has shown signs of that in recent years. Oracle, for the last 20 or more years, has had that acquisition-minded best-of-breed strategy where they go out and buy Siebel and PeopleSoft and JD Edwards and NetSuite, all these different systems. So, Oracle can't really credibly say that they're a single integrated system because they've done it by acquiring all these different systems and trying to piece it together. Same with Microsoft and, a lot of these bigger vendors.
Absolutely. And it seems as though I almost feel sorry for our client community because there's just so much more that you need to be able to internalize, and understanding that this is a very complex web of being able to create business value out of your technology or your overall digital enterprise in general. So I want to kind of put you on the spot, Eric, because in our fourth quarter here at Third Stage, we've experienced a massive shift into needing that independent advisor from very large businesses because of the inability to understand all of the different messaging and agendas for vendors. And we've always done that, but it seems as though there's a massive shift to needing that overall PMO or project oversight from an independent standpoint. So I wonder if you could kind of just give us maybe a look behind the curtain to what's kind of happened as far as that evolution and what Third Stage has experienced.
Sure. Well, part of it is strategic on our side. So we're focusing on really emphasizing our PMO, our independent technology agnostic PMO capabilities for larger organizations in particular. We still have small and mid-sized clients as well, but our client mix has really shifted pretty significantly in the last year. But the other part of it too, it's not just a strategic effort on our part as an organization. It's also looking behind the curtain of what's going on in the industry. And I have a pretty strong emerging opinion that the level of distrust in the digital transformation and enterprise technology space is at an all-time high, because first of all, there's always been sort of an underlying distrust because, everyone's out for themselves. They're just trying to sell their software and whatever. But you kind of saw it for what it was. Yeah, if I call SAP or if I call Accenture or Deloitte, they're gonna pitch me on something that's very specific, and that's fine. But what's happening now in more recent years is you get Microsoft and SAP, for example. I'd say they're the two most guilty parties of this. But SAP and Microsoft are, in my opinion, just wrecking whatever trust they had with their customers by saying, guess what, customer? You've been using, let's say, SAP ECC for the last 20 years or 15 years. Guess what, Microsoft Great Plains customer? You've been using Great Plains for however many years. You've got 2 years to get off that system, and we're going to stop this because we're going to discontinue it. So it's, in my opinion, it's extortion. I mean, it's absolutely unacceptable, highly unethical. It's the most unethical thing I've seen in this industry. And I thought it really couldn't get much more unethical as it was. But now you get these big software vendors who are really bullying their clients into going through digital transformations that they may or may not need to go through, but it's in the self-interest of the software vendor. And the reason they're doing this is because they want you to move to the cloud. They make a lot more money on cloud subscriptions than they did in the old on-premise model. The investors are rewarding the software vendors for doing more cloud business. If you look at anytime Oracle or SAP or Microsoft puts out their annual or quarterly earnings, there's a heavy emphasis on cloud growth. And the reason for that is because the investors love it. Investors love it. Therefore, the organization loves it. Therefore, they're going to push and bully their clients into shifting off-prem into the cloud, which may or may not be the right answer for them. So those tactics and shenanigans from the software vendors are really undermining trust in the industry. And I think distrust is an all-time high. And back to your question, that's why organizations are looking for independent third parties like our team at Third Stage.
And with that, with technology truly influencing every piece of the organization, are the stakes higher?
They are. They are higher, partly because organizations are constantly changing. Anytime you go through a digital transformation, there's risk. And now with the world changing faster than ever with the pandemic and economic uncertainty, with employment and labor issues and just all sorts of things that organizations didn't have to deal with at this magnitude since before the 2020s. Now the stakes are higher. And then you add to the fact that technology is changing so quickly and there's so much upside opportunity and potential of new technology that if you don't invest in technology, you're missing out on those opportunities. So you've got sort of a double whammy here where it's higher risk. There's more at stake operationally. Your business is changing. You don't want to bring your business to a standstill because you're going through a digital transformation. And at the same time, you don't want to just sit still because you're falling further behind because technology is changing so quickly. So you're sort of getting hit on both sides or both fronts as it relates to that.
Excellent. Well, I think that that's a really kind of holistic view of what is happening from our standpoint, from what you see and our delivery team sees, and then also from the software vendor side. And it seems as though there's a lot of shifting parts. I think Darren did such a great job of understanding what a software partner should be and that supportive nature of what they could be and bring to the table. And, I always am on the rainbows and unicorn side, but I will say that it was incredibly refreshing to see a leader really preach that ability to be a good strategic partner that supports the business agenda as opposed to just the software agenda. So I think the audience voted. I voted. We all would love a second interview with him. So thank you for featuring him, and thank you for Darren to joining us.
Yeah, he's a great guest, and I'd love to have him back on again. And along those lines, too, if anyone has suggestions for another vendor CEO or just guest in general, I'm always open to that. So be sure to reach out and comment on who you think we should have on the show, besides Elon Musk and Larry Ellison, which we're already working on that. And actually, this transition is pretty interesting because our next segment is going to involve an interview that I did with John Reed last year. And John Reed made this transition super easy because he was in the stream chatting in the previous segment with Darren Roos. So it's just kind of a nice transition. He made it really easy for us here. He had a couple comments that I referred to in that discussion, but we're going to play a clip that he and I did about a year ago as we were talking about tech trends as it relates to the upcoming 2022 at the time. So we want to play the clip again, largely because most of the stuff is still relevant, but also because we now want to revisit those trends and talk about, how relevant they are or aren't, and what's changed in the last year. So we're going to do that here in just a moment, but first we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
If you are involved in any sort of digital transformation or business change initiative, you will want to download the 2021 Digital Transformation Report. With its comprehensive overview of business and technology trends and best practices, this report is a must-have guide for any transformation project or executive team. Download this free report by visiting Third Stage Consulting at thirdstage-consulting.com. You can also visit our website to learn more about us or download independent reports, videos, and other best practices. Again, visit thirdstage-consulting.com today to learn how to take your transformation to the third stage of success.
Welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. My name is Eric Kimberling here with Kyler Cheatham. You can find new episodes of this show every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and audio podcast platforms throughout the world. I'm excited for our next guest. We're going to actually play you a clip of an interview I did several months ago, actually over a year ago now, with John Reed, who's with a web outlet called Diginomica, which is really good, by the way. If you haven't checked it out, it's spelled Diginomica, Diginomica.com. So Diginomica. And that took me a minute. I was trying to make it easier for everyone. Hopefully I didn't just confuse you by butchering it myself, but it's Diginomica. And what I like about it is not only is it a good way to keep up with tech trends and what's going on in the industry, but they've got a really unique style, I guess you'd say, in terms of how they write, the topics they cover. It's not biased. It's not sugar coated. It's somewhat disruptive and controversial, like a lot of our content, even more so, I'd say, in many cases. So check that out if you haven't. It's a really good website, and it's one that I go to often. It's one of my go-tos. And anyway, one of the most interesting people I think in the industry is John Reed. He's someone I've known for a long time. We've had many interviews and conversations over the years, and always have a really good time with this. In fact, he's another one I'd love to have on the show here soon. But the reason we want to play this clip it was he and I talking about the tech trends for 2022 about this time last year. And we want to play you that clip again so we can revisit it. First of all, a lot of these trends are still relevant now, if not most of them. Second of all, what's changed? What's evolved in these trends? And what can we learn as we think about what's new here in 2023? So let's roll the clip, and we'll unpack it here when we get through the discussion.
Primarily have been a publisher, a journalist. Sometimes I've ran consulting and training practices, but for the most part, not. But I think we've arrived at a lot of similar conclusions around projects. And and I think we both don't mind being a little bit outspoken about what we've learned, particularly things like the dangers of customers being over dependent on mega SIs that don't have their best interests at heart, and vendors flogging technology that might really be, if not snake oil, not ready for prime time. Things like that. I think you and I have a lot in common in terms of our desire to have a more practical and perhaps more jugular conversation about what it takes to be successful in this industry. But anyway, that eventually found my way to Diginomica with some other cohorts about 8 years ago. And we were basically disillusioned with a lot of stuff around how enterprise publishing was done, how enterprise media worked, how the enterprise analyst game worked. And we wanted to try to sort of disrupt that, I guess, by creating our own thing. We've had some good success with that. And so we're now 8 years in. I will say it still feels like a startup a lot of the time. Some of that's good. Some of that keeps me up at night, but I can tell you a little bit more about what drives Diginomica, but that's sort of my main undertaking now.
Right. Yeah, and that's how a lot of my interaction exposure to your thought leadership has been through Diginomica, which you're co-founder of, and also Enterprise Irregulars. I think that's where I originally first started interacting with you or sort of following you as a thought leader in the space. So tell us a little bit about Diginomica for those that don't know, and maybe it will help for those that don't know how to spell it and how to find it. But it's Diginomica. So Diginomica.com. And just to preface it, for those that don't know, it's a really good, I would consider a very good agnostic and pragmatic source for enterprise technology transformation type stuff. I mean, it's very easy to follow. It's very unbiased. And like I said, very practical. You're not sort of up in the clouds like a lot of analysts are, speaking foreign languages that don't apply to everyday realities. But maybe tell us a little bit about Diginomica. Why'd you start it? What's the goal of what is it, first of all, and why'd you start it?
A couple different reasons. We started it because we felt that most tech industry publications are pretty crap and pretty not enterprise focused as well. And we felt there was a need to provide context to enterprise news. But one of the big things, like the user experience on all the big tech sites, is just so terrible. Autoplay videos, pop-ups everywhere, advertising game, chasing eyeballs, chasing viral stories. We wanted to build a business model that was centered more around providing real practical advice that enterprise customers and people that have a stake in the enterprise can use. And a big focus of Diginomica has been, from the beginning, but really became this notion of transformation in the enterprise. And, we're advocates of transformation, but not in the way that vendors sell it. We're advocates of it in the sense that we think that there's a success to be had on the other side of the pursuit of transformation in a corporate context. But it's not just technology, it's culture, it's process, it's people, it's everything. And there's a lot of very good reasons for that. I think people are more and more receptive to that message, obviously. The last year and a half certainly helps in that regard, though it's obviously been a tragic circumstance, so it's not something we wanted to happen. But there is that sense in which, we do need to do business differently if we want to stay agile enough to compete. And so we really look at that from a large enterprise perspective primarily, and that's sort of driven our publication since we started.
Right. Yeah. And you guys just put out, massive amounts of content. You cover so many different nooks and crannies of the enterprise space. I'm always fascinated by how much you guys, it's not just SAP or Oracle or Microsoft. You're covering the whole spectrum of all types of technologies and implementation, best practices and lessons, and just I read it a lot of times just to keep up to date on what's going on, who bought, what vendor acquired what software, and what's going on with some of the vendors. You guys are really good at covering more of the newsworthy type stuff too, in addition to the more opinionated type stuff.
Yeah. And, part of our goal is that there's so much noise around stuff. And so we want people to be like, well, if I read just one article to really understand what this news means, then maybe it would be an article from us, or we can try to provide some context to that. And that's always the goal. Look, we don't always succeed. I mean, not every article that we publish is brilliant, but we do try to focus on people who are very experienced and understand the enterprise and aren't afraid to take a position. Most of our articles, aside from customer stories, which we do quite a bit of as well, most of our articles have a take where the writer takes a position at the end of the article on what they're seeing. And we think that's important to put a stake in as far as what does this mean and what do I think this is a good or bad move and why. We don't pretend to be above the fray. If you look at our site, our partners include a number of vendors, and some of them we cover their information. We're rigorous about disclosure. We think that transparency and how you're funded is a really, really big part of things. And so that's a key. Every one of our blog posts has relevant disclosures in it when we do have any vendors that are involved that we do business with. And so, we don't pretend to be like better than the business. I mean, everyone in this business is getting paid by someone, but we do try to rise above that. And also, have strong words even for those that we do business with. And one thing we tell vendors we work with is that we're still going to criticize you and we're still going to raise points and issues that we think you need to think about, because, the other thing that is just really important, and this is something that I believe, I think Diginomica as a group believes this too, but this is something I believe very strongly, is that not enough enterprise projects get across the finish line in a way that we could call successful. I mean, you've been an expert witness in a lot of situations, so you know how wrong these products can go when they really go wrong. But I find most projects are actually fairly mediocre and don't achieve a lot of the promised benefits. And I think everyone in this industry has a collective responsibility to change that. And so that is a driving focus. But I also think that humor is important too. So if you want to get a flavor for that, I would recommend starting with my weekly Enterprise Hits and Misses column, which is really me at my most unbridled. That comes out every Monday morning. And that's me taking snarky shots at things, but also trying to put the week's enterprise news in context.
Yeah, every time I see that you've tagged me in one of those, and I know you've covered something I've written, I have a moment of flattery, but then I have a moment of fear of like, what's he going to say though? It might be positive. He might be saying he agrees with me, but there's times where you've put stuff out and you're like, hey, yeah, here's an interesting tape. Totally disagree. Here's what I think, which I appreciate. I like how you're not afraid to sort of either build on a topic or challenge it or, provide a different perspective. And that's why I enjoy reading your stuff. And for those on the live stream here, if you haven't checked out Diginomica, it really is a good source. I mean, it's, like I said, newsworthy, very good opinions. And every article I read from you, there's at least 2 to 3 times throughout the read that I will laugh out loud at some of the stuff you say, because some of it is just so honest that it's funny in a way. It's like, I can't believe he's actually saying that. It's absolutely true, but I can't believe he's saying it. Or it's just flat out humor that you're using. So you have a very unique writing style that I enjoy. So I think others here on the live stream would probably appreciate it too. So you cover a lot of stuff. You see a lot of, like I said, a lot of vendors, a lot of trends in the market. What are, if you just step back and look at all the stuff you're covering right now, what gets you most excited about the space right now? Is there anything that just kind of pops out at you as like, hey, this is a really big deal, or maybe a hidden gem of a trend or something that's happening out there that the rest of us aren't really paying attention to? Or what are some of those things that excite you that's happening out there?
Well, I'm excited by 2 things. One is kind of classic and one is kind of like more new stuff. I mean, the thing that excites me in a classic sense is conversations like we're having today, where we can be very informal and like honest about what's really happening in the enterprise. And I never get tired of that. Like whether it's a dinner at a trade show or if you get lucky enough to go to an online event where there actually is a forum for that. I think like people putting heads together and like genuinely sharing their experiences and trying to solve problems, like to me that never gets old. But as far as like trends are concerned, I'm a little grouchy with a lot of trend stuff, because like when you've been around for a long time, you see like, I always want to know, how is this thing different than the last thing? So in other words, like digital transformation, one of my first questions on that was like, I challenge anyone who used that phrase to tell me why it's different than change management, because we're using that phrase. Now we're using this new phrase. So why is that different? Same thing with AI ops, for example. Okay, that sounds cool, new and different. Well, how is that different than just workflow automation, for example? So all of that stuff really bothers me. And so I'm not like a futurist, which is kind of what you and I were talking about before, is like, I don't like to get tagged by that label because I get really irritated by, for example, so many people got burned by blockchain and spent so much money on blockchain that I don't think they're ever going to see ROI on. Not that it won't eventually mature and have use cases, but it's just one thing. I don't like fanning the hype of stuff. But having said that, I do like what modern enterprise technology is shaping up as, because I do think the technology is getting better. And and I think that reinforces some very interesting things. Like, for example, this year, I've done a couple of stories where you call it low code ERP if you want. Low code doesn't really matter that much as a buzzword, but the idea is basically putting power in the hands of business users to basically automate their own workflows and do stuff without having to go through IT. And the same thing goes with things like reporting and analytics, where there used to be all these IT bottlenecks around all of this type of stuff. And these days you simply can't afford to wait till the end of the month or the year to get certain kinds of reports or data, or to build like a new little app or something. And the more I see business users being able to take that power in their own hands, the more excited I get about where enterprise software could ultimately wind up as, because so far it really hasn't gotten there as much as the marketing folks would have you believe. But that's what kind of gets me excited, is seeing business users truly engaged.
Yeah, that's super interesting. And use or taking the power back, almost, taking the power back from IT, and also taking the power back from consultants or system integrators. I mean, because a lot of times these companies, they get so dependent on the big SIs or outside consultants that they can't function without them, because they just have this black hole of lack of knowledge that the SI or the consultants have. But now we're kind of shifting that to make it to where you don't necessarily need that level of outside support.
I totally agree. And in case people think I'm kind of like criticizing IT and kind of and casting a negative light on IT, I'm not at all. In fact, I think I just did a use case about a CIO who looks like he's really going to be able to deliver for the business and the medical industry with their vision of more connected care for patients, which is a really good thing for everyone. And this CIO is getting much more engaged with business outcomes because he feels he has the technology to deliver on that. And like, to me, I actually get depressed when I run into companies that don't have any IT. Now, granted, there are some startups that have a cloud first thing and they got to move fast. They don't want to build IT. But in general, I like IT as a differentiator. I like the idea of people in IT working on differentiated projects, embedding their technology into smart devices, or building customer-facing apps, or doing really cool stuff that impacts their business. I love that vision of IT. I just don't like the vision of IT as like, and of course, security and compliance, all that stuff matters also. But I just don't like that vision of IT as like the bottleneck that prevents business users from getting things done.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And it also, forces the business users to connect the dots between the technological needs and what those business needs are.
Totally.
And they're best equipped to do that, for sure. What about, and by the way, before I ask you this next question, please feel free to pop in any questions that the audience has here too. Ultimately, that's what we want to get to, are your questions. And again, it's really the good news with having you on the show. There's no one topic that we need to focus on. You're kind of that broad view of the marketplace here. So anything that's vendor specific or trend specific, implementation best practice.
Take a crack at it. Between you and me, to be able to come up with something. So
yeah, well, if we can't, then we probably shouldn't be doing what we're doing. If we can't come up with some sort of answer. So please do submit your questions here. But what about maybe let me go the opposite direction of what I just asked you, and talk about what are those trends or buzzwords that you think right now are the most overhyped, or that an enterprise technology buyer should be the most leery of? I know you mentioned blockchain a little bit, but what are some of your thoughts there?
Well, I mean, a lot of these buzzwords do represent topics that are worth reckoning with. It's just you have to be wary about immediately opening up your wallet and feeling like you can't be successful without it. One that gets a lot of debate right now is customer data platforms. That's huge on the CX side. And so the question then becomes like, is this new and different than the data integration activities we've undertaken in the past? And so you need to really take a hard look at that. And will we get a better result? Like, integrating all your customer data sounds wonderful, but then think about, well, what about our finance data, and what about the rest of our corporate data that we may need visibility into, our supply chain data? How can you serve customers if you don't have visibility into your supply chain? So these acronyms like CDP, you have to be really, really careful when vendors start glomming onto that, because they're doing it partially because they're going to sell a bunch of stuff to you. I think we have to be really careful with AI. There's all kinds of problems with AI. A lot of AI tools ship in problematic ways that perhaps include biases. We see that a ton in HR. You do a search on AI recruitment controversy, and you'll find all kinds of stuff around companies that tried AI tools for recruiting and found that they were actually screening qualified applicants or not including diverse applicants for various reasons. So there's always an underbelly to these technologies. It doesn't mean that they're bad. It just means they deserve a close look. So I don't know that I would say any of them. I mean, blockchain's a little bit of a special case because it was so hyped when there were just no use cases. And I'm still waiting to do my first live production scale enterprise blockchain story. I keep telling vendors, like, please send me your live production story. Nope. But we've got this great POC, which is proof of concept. We've been doing POCs in blockchain now for 5 or 6 years. And so that, that's obviously technology that I get a little particularly wary of just because, the use cases aren't there yet.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good way to look at it. I think I agree with you, by the way. I think there's so many cool technologies out there, and blockchain is one of them, but you have to take it all with a grain of salt and recognize that even if you do commit to a certain technology, whether it's a type of technology or even a certain vendor or a certain specific software solution, there's always an underbelly to it, like you said. And I think that's true for any solution out there. Okay, we're here playing a clip with John Reed from Diginomica talking about some of the tech trends in 2022 headed into 2023. We're going to continue the conversation when we come back, but first we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Are you looking to stay ahead of the curve in the ever-changing landscape of digital transformation? Then you need our newly released 2023 Digital Transformation Report. This comprehensive report covers the latest trends, technologies, and strategies to ensure your digital transformation is optimized for success. The 2023 Digital Transformation Report is packed full of proven methodologies and insights from experts in the independent digital transformation field. You'll also receive practical insights on how to implement digital transformation strategies within your unique organization. This free report is available for download on our website at thirdstage-consulting.com under our Thought Leadership section.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. We're playing you a clip of John Reed from Diginomica and I talking about enterprise tech trends. We're getting a few comments or questions here from the audience, so maybe I'll jump in here. First is a comment that it's worth noting here, and you alluded to this a minute ago, John, but Greg mentions here that John owns Cloud ERP Friday afternoons here on LinkedIn. So it's a little plug for you have a show that you do on.
Oh, yeah. It's usually at 4 Eastern, though. I'm probably not going to do it today because I wanted to focus on this show. So, but yeah, usually Fridays at 4:30 have kind of a blowout. It's not always about Cloud ERP, though. I do a fair amount of CX stuff. Mostly I just interview independent thinkers in the enterprise and see where the conversations go. It's not unlike this format. So
very cool. Okay. Well, yeah, we'll be sure to check that out for the audience there. Another comment that I've dropped a few comments on Diginomica over the years, all taken in good stride. So another fan of your publication there, or your outlet there. Here's a question: What are the API integration best practices for before, during, or after implementation, provided that the client has quite a few best of breed systems? So that's a very specific question. We're jumping right in here, going straight into the weeds. The API integration. I don't know if that's
it's actually really. I'm glad you raised that. And what's one interesting thing, just by the way, is I was going to say another buzzword I'm very wary of is multi-cloud, and I was just discussing this the other day and how I like the idea of multi-cloud environments, but the problem becomes that that the tools to allow customers to easily move workloads between clouds just haven't delivered on the multi-cloud promise. So that's one I would advise being very wary of as a term. But the idea of like avoiding lock-in is always a really good discussion to have. As far as APIs are concerned, I mean, the thing about APIs is that they are a step forward from classic point-to-point integration, but you do need to be conversing with the vendors that are responsible for providing those APIs and understanding what the impact of it is, and also your technology team. Not all APIs are created equal. Some of them are more robust and have more business content and are more readily usable. Others will get you into trouble if you don't have certain standard configurations. And I know you cover this a lot in your blog, but if you get over customized, and you can do this even with cloud software, sometimes it can affect those API integrations going forward. One of the biggest things you need to ask about with the vendors around APIs is, what is the testing going to look like with these APIs going forward? Could they break? If so, how? And because an API works today doesn't mean it's going to work 3 months from now when a number of vendors have updated their software, or a year from now, likewise. So I think the biggest thing about APIs is to realize that they're not some magic solution. And in fact, I believe that if certain vendors work very closely together on a lot of projects, that they need to go beyond APIs and provide a deeper level of sophisticated integration. One good example of that would be Salesforce, just because they are a partner of ours, so take it for what that's worth. But so many customers want to integrate whatever they're doing with Salesforce, especially like in the ERP space or whatever. So I think it's very important to ask about what kind of dedicated integration you have and what the relationships are between those vendors. Do those vendors talk to each other at all around their API strategies and their integration strategies? So, I mean, I've never been on an API project, so you have to take that with a grain of salt, but those are the kinds of questions I'd be asking. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I think it's absolutely true. And especially in today's day and age, where I think that whole best of breed concept is becoming more acceptable and more common. 10, 20 years ago, it was almost a bad word to say, I'm going to have 2 or 3 or 4 different systems and tie them all together. But now the tools are generally flexible enough and the architectures are open enough that you can do that more realistically. But, you still have to make sure it's all going to work together and that you've clearly defined your data strategy and you understand where the data is going to reside and how you're going to manage that master data, where you're going to manage it. So there's just a lot of variables that need to be addressed, but not to say you shouldn't do it. It's just back to the point of the underbelly or the risks. You've got to be able to manage those pieces.
Beware of seamless integration, folks.
Yes.
Seamless integration. That is one of the phrases that always scares me.
Yeah. And I had a call with a client this morning, actually, who is a customer of SAP S/4HANA, a space that I know very well as well. And we both have histories with being in the SAP world earlier in our careers. But he had talked about how with SAP, it's actually easier, in his opinion, it's easier to integrate non-SAP products than it is to integrate SAP's own products to each other, which I thought was super interesting comment.
Ouch.
Yeah. So I thought, well, that's because you would assume, if I'm buying a bunch of stuff from one vendor, it's going to seamlessly integrate, right? I mean, it makes sense. You would think, but then you get into the reality of it and it doesn't quite work that way.
Well, right. We could have a discussion about acquired products and how that changes that, but
yes, with the Reba and Concur and all the acquisitions they've done in particular.
So, Eric, I wanted to mention to you, you're kind of guiding our question flow, so you can decide where you want to take this. But I did prepare some unique content for your audience in your show. What I did,
yes.
You write a lot about project success and how to achieve it. So what I did is I came up with my underrated keys to project success that I believe don't get enough airtime. And yes. I thought you might enjoy hearing them because it might clash with some of yours and be kind of fun. So I prepared, I think, about 8 of them. I don't have an exact count because some of them are kind of related to each other. But anyway.
Yeah,
I got them. Great. So whenever you want to hit them, I've got them for you.
Let's jump into it because I think that'll stimulate. And I'm excited too because I have no idea what's on your list, which is great.
You do not.
And I want to hear what the audience has to say too. So I'll kind of watch. I think it'll probably stimulate more questions and comments. So yeah, please fire away. Your top 8 or 10 or however many it is cool. Underrated keys to success.
Yeah. Well, let me preface this by just quickly saying that a lot of the keys to project success you read about on Eric's blog, for example, are pretty, I don't want to say they're they're mundane, but they're not sexy, but they just are true. Things like executive buy-in, change management is a theme that you hit all the time. That's obviously a given. Training, for example, companies continue to chronically underinvest in training. And when you look at why products fall short, it's often like a real key to why they did. And so there are things like that are there that I'm not going to mention today just because they're obvious. They're important though, but they're just not that much fun to talk about because we keep talking about them.
Right.
But then there's some newer ones that are kind of important that I'm not going to get into as well, but they have to do with the fact that a lot of these multi-year products now, you could have a multi-year transformation project, but I don't believe you're going to see it through unless you have so-called quick wins. So one of the big jobs of today's products is figuring out what those quicker wins are going to look like. That has to be put into place as part of this. But the quick wins have to tie into an overall platform strategy. So in other words, the other mistake companies have made, and this I've seen it in the pandemic as well, is roll out an app quickly to customers because you need to have a direct-to-customer app, but you didn't think about what happens when I build 10 more apps, and I have 10 of them. They need to be really on the same platform and be sharing the same design characteristics probably, but did you think through that? And with data platforms is the same, because more and more this is about information and data and not just transactional systems. So you have to have a data platform strategy as well. But I think a lot of that is all understood. I'm not going to sit here and say it's easy. I think that's understood. The other one I think that's understood is that you have to be able to know how you're going to measure your success. And so I think more and more attention is being paid, and rightly so, to what are the metrics by which we judge these outcomes. And the metrics need to be much more business oriented than they were in the past. So not just, we got off of these legacy systems and now we're processing more transaction per second. Who cares? Are you getting closer to your customer? Are you getting closer to your suppliers? All that kind of stuff. So that's all sort of the understood stuff. So let me get to the stuff that I think is more underrated stuff.
Sure.
I believe a lot of this comes down to what I call the paradox of customer ownership, which is that successful projects require more customer ownership over the outcome of those projects and less what I would call sort of trust in the SI. I was going to say blind faith, but that's not entirely fair. But less trust in the SI. A lot of times the external partners get in there because they've been in there for a long time and they've built the relationships up, and it's kind of a given. And I kind of reject that. I think you need to step back from that a little bit. Software selection is rarely the reason a project goes wrong, but you do have to choose the right software.
Yeah.
But the thing I would say, the first underrated key is picking the right partner, and that has an industry component to me. So you need someone who understands your industry, and that's why the generic SI thing I'm skeptical of, because a lot of times I think the best SI or partner for your project may not be a large SI. Maybe it is, but it's got to be people that understand your industry and can speak to you about what other customers in your industry are doing, how they're winning, where they're going wrong. If they can't have that conversation with you, I don't care how well they know your software, they won't be able to help you. These generic software categories like ERP and CRM, they are not going to be generic categories in 5 years. I can tell you, even in the CRM world, they're talking about industry now and how do we create customer management, customer experience applications that fit a particular industry situation. So you need partners that understand your industry. So that's my top key.
Right. It's a good one.
Do you want to comment on that before I move into a few others, or?
No, I think it's a great point. I mean, I think too many companies get enamored by a name. It's Accenture, it's Deloitte, it's IBM, whoever. And the saying that drives me crazy is no one ever got fired for hiring IBM or Accenture or Deloitte, except I can name a ton of people that have been fired for hiring one of them. That's the caveat to that.
And wound up in court, like in various lawsuits that you've served as an expert witness on as well. And look, there are some great teams and larger SIs as well. So I'm not just going to sit here and trash that. It's more, but I think you have to look more at experience than name, and make sure that those you engage with are the ones who are actually going to be seeing your project through and on the ground with you, quote unquote, even if they're not on the ground per se. They may not be on the ground, but you know what I mean. My next one.
No matter who it is, even if it's a great fit, whether it's a big SI or not, you still have to manage those consultants. I mean, it's your project and you still have to own it. So I think that's the other thing too, is don't assume that just because you found the right one, that now your work here is done, they're going to take it from here. You still have to work very closely with them and collaborate and have the right controls in place and all that stuff. So
my next one is I look for signs of struggle in the customer partner relationship. And by that, I mean, I want to, when I do interviews and such, I want to hear about the hard times. I don't care what project you have. If you didn't have a hard time in a moment of truth or two on that project, I don't buy your success. And I'm looking for partners that are not perfect and have these perfect rosy stories. I'm looking for stories of how we had a gut punch and how we came together and overcame it. That's what I want to hear about. And I don't hear enough of those stories, but that's what I look for. And when I see really successful projects, that's what I see. Is I see a relationship between the customer, the vendor, the partner that have all been tested and they've seen it through. And that's what I'm looking for.
Yeah, that's a great one. And it gets back to the point of every decision, whether it's which consulting partner, which vendor, or which product you use, or whatever it may be, there's always a dark side to it, or there's always some sort of risk or some sort of not a failure point, but mistake. Like in the case of consultants, where have they made mistakes? Where have the challenges been with the project? And if you're not picking up on that, then you're missing something because it's there. You just have to understand what they are.
Bingo. And a lot of the rest of mine kind of fall into a general category, which is that I have a lot more confidence and hear a lot more good things with customers that the way I put it is they come up for air more often. So in other words, they're not heads down all the time, focused on themselves. They have context. They have context of what their peers are doing. They have context of what the industry are doing. They enjoy debating trends with analysts and bloggers and people like yourself. So there are different components to that. I look for example, it's a cultural thing, right? In the sense that there are some companies that really don't encourage or provide budget for their employees to do these things. And there's a lot of reasons for that. I think a lot of them are ultimately self-defeating. Some of the reasons are, oh my gosh, like if we give our employees all these networking and immersion opportunities and send them to conferences and stuff, they'll meet other employers and they'll get hired away from us. And so like, let's be insular, but it always fails in the end. And so I look for things like active user group involvement. I look for people who are always out there networking on LinkedIn and elsewhere, asking questions in product forums, getting information. That kind of stuff is so invaluable. When I see customers talking together at trade shows and swapping war stories, I sit here and say, gosh, every minute of this is worth thousands of dollars of consulting time. What they're bringing home to their team from these conversations gives them such huge perspective. So many of the problems that we run into on projects are because we're not getting regular infusions of good information that make us all more, understanding of what is really happening and how to get a good result. So a lot of things fall into that category. And I'll add another one to it, but I'll see if you have a comment on that.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, as a consultant, and it's easy to think that, people are just going to want to come to you to get the answers and get the advice. But I think, when we do our events, like our live events or virtual events, it's just as, I think there's just as much value to people attending those, getting information from each other and just learning from each other's mistakes and war stories as it is hearing it from a consultant. And I think in some ways, a lot of ways, actually, your peers are going to be a lot more credible because you can relate to them better than you could a consultant who's an outsider, looking in. But if you're dealing with a peer who's sitting in your exact same seat and they've made some mistakes, maybe they've done some things right that you can learn from, that's pretty invaluable. And that tends to stick just as well, if not better sometimes, than consulting advice. So I totally agree with you on that.
The next one's a really big one for me, and I have a whole series on Diginomica. I've written about this. I think I might even have a piece about you in this series. I'll have to check. I'll check it out. But it's the importance of independent advisors in project results. And independent advisors can fit all kinds of different flavors. But what it comes down to is that whoever you select for your prime partner should have some level of accountability at various points. That could be independent subject matter experts who come in on a consulting basis. It could be people who participate in software evaluation. It could be people who do software audits and maturity checks. There's all kinds of flavors of independence. And it's very, very important to integrate their voices into what it is you do. And there are objections to this that I hear, and the biggest one is, oh, well, that's a political minefield, and it makes things so much more complicated, and the main prime vendor is threatened by this, and it will, perhaps all of those things are true, but you still have to do it, because otherwise you're putting too much stock in one vested interest or two to make sure that this goes a certain way. And you can't afford that. These products are too important. So sorry, but you have to learn how to manage the politics of it.
Yeah. And I would almost argue, is it really politics, or is it that you have a party there that's calling out the elephant in the room, which is there's a problem or here's a risk and we need to deal with it, versus no, let's just shove that under the rug and not deal with it. So you could call that political, but in my view, it's like, yeah, it's sort of politics. It does get into some politics, but I think it's because it's somewhat of a threat sometimes to the SI. I know for us, a lot of times, I know a lot of system integrators don't want us involved. And it's not because we don't know what we're doing. Exactly. It's because we create a level of accountability and we expose risks. And that's what you should do anyway. Not because you want to point fingers or assign blame. It's not about that. It's just these projects are messy. And if you're not feeling like it's messy, you're doing it wrong. You're missing something if you don't get into the messiness of it. So you might as well just draw the messiness out, tackle it, deal with it, clean it up as you're going, rather than brushing it under the rug. And then post go live, you find that you can't function your business because you didn't deal with any of these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, in good, healthy product environments, it shouldn't be politics, because your partners should welcome that. And that should be part of when you select a partner. You should be very upfront with them that even though we're going to really put our trust in you for this project, we're going to have other people involved that are going to provide input in various points. And, a good project environment, people welcome that kind of openness and appreciate like the informed judgment of experts, because the independents that come in are not coming in like to screw up your project. They're coming in to provide valuable perspective. And so ideally, right, to your point, those politics shouldn't be there, but I just wanted to acknowledge it, because I do want to acknowledge that I do think it does require a little more finesse to manage, but I think the payoff is just so huge if you can figure out how to do it. So, yeah.
And the other thing too is, you were talking about, I can't remember if it's before or after we started the live stream. I know we were talking a little bit before we went live. But at one point here today, we were talking about how people need to sort of take control back from their project, and not necessarily just view it as an IT project. We're sort of talking about that whole technology versus business piece of it. And when you have an independent advisor, well, let me back up. When you have a software vendor, a big SI that's managing everything, and you have no other counter opinions in there, you're going to view everything, or they're going to view everything as sort of a technology first. Like if I'm an SAP integrator, let's figure out how SAP is going to fit in here. Well, there's a lot of places where SAP doesn't belong there. I mean, you can still be using SAP, but you don't need to be using it for everything. You don't need to buy every single module out there or deploy it to the organization. So those are the types of decisions that happen throughout an implementation that, to your point, might be perceived as political, but it's, I think, just asking good questions and challenging, the status quo in a good way that's going to help you longer term. Okay, we're here playing a clip with John Reed from Diginomica, talking about some of the tech trends in 2022 headed into 2023. We're going to continue the conversation when we come back, but first we'll take a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control. Hi, this is Eric Kimberling, the CEO of Third Stage Consulting, and we recently hosted our Digital Stratosphere 2022 virtual event. It's 3 days of packed content related to digital transformation best practices, about 16 or 18 different workshops and different speakers that are presenting on different topics, everything you need to know about transformation. The bad news is if you miss that event, the event's over. The live event already happened. But the good news, if you've missed it, or even if you did attend it and you want to see replays or you want to catch the sessions you missed, you can do that now by going to stratosphere2022.com. Go to stratosphere2022.com, register. All you have to do is put in your name and email address, just a few fields. You get immediate access to all the recordings, and the recordings cover everything from digital strategy, software selection, organizational change, process improvement, architecture, data migration, cloud, trends in the industry, how to avoid failure, some of the legal aspects to think about, contractual aspects to think about as it relates to your transformation. All that is stuff that you'll get by registering for Stratosphere 2022 Replay. And again, go to stratosphere2022.com and you can listen to all the replays of all the workshops that you might have missed at the event. So hope you check it out, and thanks for listening. We'll see you soon. Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. We're playing you a clip of John Reed from Diginomica and I talking about enterprise tech trends.
Then the next thing is I have two more, so this is the second to last, is health checks, which is the other part of coming up for air. Is, you need some form of health checks on your project on a much more regular basis. And so how that works is up to you. I'm finding that increasingly there's companies that will offer those to you and come in periodically to do some kind of a project health check. And, I'm not going to name a bunch of names now because I don't want to do a big advertisement for companies, but they are out there. You can contact me offline or perhaps Eric if you want to learn more about that. But to me, I know that it's kind of it almost seems like a dental appointment. And so I know that companies who do these health checks do find some resistance from some companies, because sometimes it's just kind of like a dental appointment where it's oh, you might have a cavity over here. Well, that's not always the news you want to hear at that moment in time. But when you look back on it, you're man, I'm really glad I got on top of that. And so coming up for air more often includes a formalized health check that could take stock of various aspects of your project, whether it's project morale or timeline versus actual goals or whatever it is.
Right. That's a good one. And it, you coming up for air is an important concept. You want to be able to see the forest for the trees, and it's so easy to get down in the weeds and get all tangled up in all the details of how the system's going to get designed and built and tested and all that stuff. I think companies need to back up every so often and just sort of look at the lay of the land and see where the risks are, where the landmines are, and start to navigate those better.
Yeah, absolutely. Especially because there can be big leadership changes. You could have a CEO turnover. You could have an acquisition pending. There's all kinds of things that can change roadmaps and change goals. And if your business goals change, then your projects have to change. So all of that requires much more adaptable thing. And then the final thing, which could be a whole show unto itself, is my very firm belief that for the most part, go live is just the beginning of extracting benefits from projects. The idea originally came from my now past partner, Michael Doan, who I wrote a book with back in the day, but he had developed a lot of maturity models in the ERP and SAP environment to help companies think about how you thrive after go live, is how he put it. But the same is true for modern software. I've written some pieces on cloud ERP benefits and how I'm very struck by the fact that a lot of customers get so excited about their go live because they got off all these legacy systems and they integrated a bunch of databases. They rolled it out to new regions, all this stuff. The software is more user-friendly than their old stuff. They think that's the end of it. But in fact, that's just the beginning. And there's so much more that is possible, but you have to work at it. And I could go into all kinds of things, whether it's, automating workflows and creating the possibility to automate workflows, or whether it's, dashboards and reporting and alerts infrastructures, whether it's new, predictive technologies that gets layered on top of your core systems or whatever it is. But I've kind of outlined a whole framework for that because there's so much more that can happen after go live. And unfortunately, the reality is that if you just kind of do your thing, you won't achieve those benefits. They don't just suddenly magically happen. Yeah. It requires, in fact, in one of my articles on Cloud ERP, I'm just going to read this very short sentence to you. If I can find it. Yeah, there we go. I say, in this case, I'm talking about cloud ERP, but it doesn't have to be ERP systems. Despite the benefits of moving to modern ERP, many cloud ERP gains don't seem to come until well after go live. Extracting full value from cloud ERP is not about flipping the go live switch. It requires organizational will and a fierce collaboration with the vendor and our consulting partner. And I go on to say, I don't care whether you call it digital transformation or business model evolution or agility or whatever the hell you want to call it. The point is you have to work for it. It's not going to land in your lap.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point. And one thing that's always fascinated me about these sorts of projects and the way organizations think about these projects is you spend all this time and money, just massive amounts of time and money to implement and get to go live, but they don't spend that extra little time it takes to just fine tune it. And and it's not a lot of effort. I mean, in fact, I would argue the highest ROI you're going to get on any activity in your entire project is going to be those little things you do after go live. And it's just fascinating to me. It's like you went through all that heartache and pain and budget overruns and all that stuff, but you won't go that extra little mile to get some real value out of it. I mean, that's where and they're usually little things too. It's a lot of times it's like, we have a work group over here that's not trained in the system, or they just are using it wrong. And if we just got them to use it the right way, the way it's meant to be used, we could deliver X amount of value. So it's, identifying that laundry list of things that you could be doing, prioritizing based on value, and then going out and deploying just minor modifications to it. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah. So that's my list.
That is
if we have any awesome audience questions or additions, I probably missed a few good ones, but that's what I prepared. So if anyone has any good ones that they like, feel free to throw them into the chat. I'd love to see, because at some point I'll write a new piece on this and I'll try to bring a lot of this discussion into it. So
yeah, I'd love to hear the audience too, in terms of what they might be, what people think you missed or what they would add to the list, or if you agree or disagree with anything, that'd be great to hear too. So let's see. There's a bunch of comments and questions coming in here from the audience. Here's one I'll cover here with you, John, see what you think. Isn't that a norm in big ERP projects to call on independent advisors during the realization phase?
If only it was. It should be.
Yeah.
Eric, you do a lot of this work. Do you find that to be the norm?
No, it's not the norm. I mean, obviously the clients that hire us, it's the norm. It's what they do. But what amazes me though is with, I'd say, an overwhelming majority of expert witness cases where there's a lawsuit and, a project has failed and they bring us in as expert witnesses, or in cases where it's not a lawsuit, but it's a project failure or a struggling project and they hire us to come in and clean it up. In an overwhelming number of those cases, there was no independent voice of reason. And so the organizations get led astray down a path that doesn't necessarily make sense for them. And they don't know how to get off that path because they don't know any better. They don't know what questions to ask or how to redirect, or if they should redirect. And so, I'd say no, it's not the norm, but I would agree it should be. And that's the whole reason I started the company that I started.
I guess I would say if you think that's the norm, you're probably working for a good organization and you should probably stay with that company. And congratulations for that. Any other questions?
Yeah. How about this? This is getting into a little bit of change management stuff here, but what are the musts in the communication plan during implementation? So what are the things we must communicate in our communication plan during a implementation or transformation?
I really like that one, because I do think companies, I'll be interested to hear your view on this, because I would definitely defer to you on change management. But my view is where companies can sometimes make a mistake is they can talk too much about how this is going to help the company. I do think that's important because we want the company to survive, but not enough about what the benefits are going to be for you. So what I'm looking for is more role-based information on how is this going to make the user, your daily life better? Because if it's going to help my company, but my job's going to suck for 3 months, that's not so great. And the other thing I'm really looking for is some real transparency around, okay, this is difficult. You're not going to necessarily enjoy all aspects of what's new. We tried to incorporate your changes, so in other words, the input's in there, but we weren't able to do all of them. We have to, in many cases in these bigger projects, we had to go back to standard functionality in certain ways, so you have to explain why you made those decisions. So I think that transparency around all of that stuff is really important to get buy-in. But the thing is, if you bring that communications plan in, you better have had input from those users long before that plan was ever written. Otherwise, I don't care what you say, it's not going to go over. You should have gotten their input from the beginning. A lot of times these line of business users will have better ideas than you do about how to use the software. So,
yeah, and I totally agree with that. And there's a lot of situations that we see where you've got a great change team in place. You've got very capable people that can handle the communication piece of it. And it's actually oftentimes it's not the communications itself that's the problem. It's that the organization doesn't take the time up front to define what the organization is going to look like and how the changes are going to be realized. So, for example, to your point about a job sucking for an individual, but allegedly it's going to be great for the organization. You think about, we're seeing this a lot with like AI and machine learning, and you build a business case that shows that, John Reed now is going to save, 60% of his job is going to be automated. So now he can spend more time doing other stuff. And so then you hand that off to the communication team and say, okay, there's the impact to John Reed's job. And what are you going to communicate? I mean, you're going to communicate that your job's getting automated, but you don't have anything good beyond that. Like, well, what are you going to do with that time that now gets automated? And now suddenly you're creating more fear, and you're actually perpetuating, you're creating resistance by communicating what's been, what you've been tasked to communicate. So a lot of times you see that the communication and change efforts actually backfire, not because they're not good at it, but because the vision hasn't been set for what John's job is going to look like and what he's going to do with that 60% of his time that now is supposedly going to be automated.
Oh man, I love that point you raised too, because there is still a lot of fear around automation and what that means for my job and my work. And, the good news is that we're seeing in a lot of cases that because of labor shortages and things like that, that when companies automate, they actually do need those existing personnel to perform hopefully even more engaging work, because it's not as repetitive. Like a lot of the work that gets automated is the more repetitive, mundane parts. And so hopefully it's the more interesting parts, whether it's customer facing stuff or more sophisticated shop floor stuff or whatever it is. But the one thing I would say is that headcount reductions do come along with some of these projects, and to pretend otherwise is totally disingenuous. And if you do have a headcount reduction, that does need to be communicated openly as part of this exercise, and to be able to say, look, we do have to, we don't want to, but this is the situation. But then on a personal level, everyone who's staying on, you say, look, we did have to let these people go, but you're staying. Your job is changing, but you're staying, and here's the opportunity, to your point, that you're going to have. And I think most people will embrace those opportunities, but you have to be fair about how you describe them, because otherwise they're not going to use your software. I mean, salespeople are the classic example, because salespeople, especially the good ones, getting them to enter the data that you want to put into the system, to make your AI better and to make your analytics better, have fun with that. If they don't like using your system and it doesn't help them make more sales, they're not using your system. You can't force them to use. I don't care. You're not gonna be able to force them to use it. They'll just go somewhere else. They'll take another job. So I love looking at sales and change management, because that's a classic example of why, God, we need the data in those salespeople's heads. Well, how are you going to do that without losing your top salespeople? You're going to do it by showing them they're going to make even more money in the new setup. Otherwise, forget it.
Yeah, exactly. It can't just be an administrative task that they're doing for a greater good. You need to tie it to, you're going to actually make more money this way. That's a good point. Here's a great question from Frank Scavo. I think you know him, don't you?
Oh yeah, Frank. Yeah. Hey Frank, how you doing?
It's good to see you too, Frank. Hi Eric, good to see you. Would you say that many companies are so worn out by the go live that they don't follow through to do that additional part to layer on the real value added capabilities? It's a loaded question. I'll leave it to you to take the first pass at that.
Yeah, I'd love to hear your answer to that too. Yeah, I think sometimes the go live push can be exhausting, but eventually people do recover from that. The problem is that they kind of lose focus on what's possible, and sometimes their partners move on to whatever's next as well, and don't look at some of these higher level benefits, which are take a little more effort to achieve. Like in my thing, I talk about different stages of benefits. So I talk about things like the impact of data visibility in a single source of truth. I talk about setting up intelligent alert systems and anomaly detection. I talk about platform benefits and how to build on additional industry apps to your core, things like that. Researching future innovations provided by the vendor on a more regular basis, figuring out how to, all those things just require organizational energy and resources. But I think Frank's right that right after go live, you can have this big exhale. I'm not so sure that's a bad thing, but there has to be an awareness that now you got to come back to it. And this is, we talk about this notion of customer success, but it also applies to our own projects. Like, we got to keep working at it, because our business model is never a done thing. We have to keep improving it, and the software is meant to help us with that, but we can't stop.
Yeah. Yeah. And I also have to get to the root cause to Frank's question about why are people so worn out? I mean, I know these projects are tough. You and I have been through them. A lot of us on the call have been through them, but you think about, they're tough. Yes, they're tough to begin with. They're inherently tough, but I think a lot of times we make them a lot harder than they need to be, partly because we go in with these unrealistic expectations of, that 18-month global rollout of SAP, to 5,000 people. I mean, it's not going to happen in 18 months, but you're going to kill yourself trying to do it in 18 months. It's going to end up taking 24 or 36 or whatever. And you're going to be absolutely exhausted by the end, to Frank's point. But did you need to be? I mean, that's the question of if you just planned for a 24 or 36 month rollout or whatever it is, and you just had that burn rate and that tempo set, and it's a more realistic tempo, then you're going to be tired. It's going to be hard, but you at least aren't so exhausted that you just move on. I think companies get to the point of like, hey, let's just cut our losses. Let's just stop the bleeding and stop this project. And they don't want to spend any more time on that value realization.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, it's a really good question too. I like that one. Alice, take one more question here, and then we'll be here toward the end of our time slot here. But this is a great one. I love this concept or this question. But do you think that user companies should build a sort of center of excellence for their post-ERP implementation life, or still be dependent on consultants to run their systems? Another great question.
I love the question, and I think I actually had centers of excellence on the list. So this audience member is definitely rocking it. The thing is, one of the reasons I didn't do it is because I started to feel like maybe it was a little more on the obvious side, and I wanted to do more underrated. There are a lot of companies that don't have centers of excellence. I do think that that it's an important aspect of ownership to think about how you cultivate internal skills. Now, look, you're not going to necessarily cultivate internal skills in every area of technology. So you won't necessarily have a center of excellence for everything. I'm generally a big fan of center of excellence for the areas that you're really taking ownership of, like whether it's ERP or CRM, or maybe it's BI is another really good one, I think, to have a center of excellence around. AI would be a good example of a problematic one. You have to really look hard at whether you're going to invest in a data science team and cultivate that team internally. Larger companies will, but what if you're based in a more obscure location where it's hard to get people to relocate, and that's important to you? Or what if you have a hard time holding on to these people? Maybe that's not the right COE for you, and maybe you're going to have more external support around those concepts. So you have to make those decisions. But the one thing I would caution around the COE is I think sometimes it can become a little bland. And like, even when you say it, it sounds kind of bland. And I think you got to start thinking about how a COE also isn't just a skill building exercise, but actively contributes to some business result. Hank Barnes at Gartner wrote a really interesting post a while back. It was short, like a lot of his posts are, so it left me hanging a little bit. But he talked about, what if we switch center of excellence to center of innovation? And I'm not a huge fan of the word innovation because it's so flogged it almost lost meaning. But like, I like that shift a little bit, right? Like, how do we turn these into energizing activities that aren't just about filling skills gaps, but developing, new ideas that can really help the business? I think if you do that, then I think it can be a very powerful concept.
Yeah. And constantly looking for ways to improve and selectively leverage new technologies and, deploying those to your organization. And, tying it back to a comment you made earlier, again, this might've been before we went live today. But you were talking about low code ERP and how the users are becoming more self-sustained or self-reliant and less dependent on IT. With that movement toward, technology becoming more user-friendly and easier to manage it from the business side, I think that whole center of excellence concept becomes a little more realistic. It's a little bit more doable now because you have technology that isn't so complicated that you have to have this robust, sophisticated IT support function. It can be more of a business user support function. So I think that's a great point. All right, good stuff. Thank you, Jonathan. That was a great conversation, and look forward to unpacking some of those trends and revisiting some of those trends now that we're in a whole new year to see which ones are relevant, which ones have changed. We're going to do that when we come back from a quick break. You're listening to Transformation Ground Control.
Interested in working for a company that truly values your unique skills and experience? Here at Third Stage, we don't hire based on resumes alone. We look at the full candidate, experience, and willingness to provide excellent service for our clients. Within a technology, independent, and agnostic consulting firm, you have the opportunity to learn across industries with a diverse group of clients. Our consultants also have the opportunity to diversify their portfolio and learn across technology systems. If you're interested in joining a high-growth entrepreneurial organization, please reach out to us at work@thirdstage-consulting.com.
Hello, welcome back to Transformation Ground Control, episode number 103. I'm here with Kyler Cheatham, and we just had this clip that we played, Kyler, of John Reed talking about trends, tech trends as it relates to 2022. What were some of your thoughts or questions now as we sort of look back on the year 2022 and look forward to 2023?
Yeah, well, you guys crack me up because, constantly you're like, I can't remember if we're talking about that now or if we talked about that beforehand
Right.
or if we talked, and it's such great, true dialogue. And I think the thing about John is understanding just his overall dedication and intention to bringing transparency to the industry, which is interesting from a journalist and content creator standpoint. Usually we see that from a consultant or something like that, or someone, an influencer like yourself. So it's a great resource to be able to pull from a lot of his really great information.
Yeah,
And then
I agree.
And so we talked about, he had 7 different points in there, and there's a kind of a few that I want to pull out. For example, he talks about I should say probably irrelevance of naming things. So when it comes to digital transformation, when it comes to organizational change, now we look operations AI, he mentions, and now we look at things like when we started this episode, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud, all of those different names. And he really encourages businesses to actually name their own project. What do you actually want to achieve, as opposed to what, shiny marketing material did you receive from a software vendor? So I think that piece of it is still incredibly relevant in today's marketplace.
Yeah, I agree. And words are important. And, even though I have a affinity against buzzwords and they trigger me, it's like nails on a chalkboard. When you hear some word that, some consultant or analyst somewhere got paid a lot of money and spent way too much time thinking about it. It is important, though, when it comes to an organization that's going through their own transformation, it is really important to name it, to have the right language surrounding it, and to be descriptive and deliberate about what it is your transformation is trying to accomplish. So I totally agree with that.
And I like how he talks about the opportunity for IT teams and then kind of clarifies, like, I'm not at all bashing IT teams. And I think that really goes with kind of what we talked about earlier in this episode, is the evolution of the CIO and the evolution of IT trends in looking at a more business focused approach and mostly being open to different processes. The importance of mapping out those processes allows you to mine those opportunities, but only if the IT and technical resources are open to collaborating to a new way of doing things. And that's really the next level. And again, that would be one of those trends that I would put that is still very, very relevant in today's digital transformation industry.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that.
Well, if you will have more questions, or I would ask our audience to put them in the comments about which trend you most think is still relevant from John's list here. But he also has his Friday, I call them happy hours. I don't even know if he wants to brand those things, but I just can't help but brand things. So it is at, I think he said 3 p.m. Eastern time. I think I watch them at 2 p.m. here in Mountain Time in the United States. But a great opportunity to kind of engage in the conversation. Very similar approach to that user-generated content and questions like Eric has. So definitely hope everyone can pop in there and join that overall conversation. But overall, I still feel like all 7 of his points are incredibly relevant and should be kind of part of a playbook when it comes to phase 1 or any sort of evaluation when going through a new technical implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, he's always got good content, like I said, both in his his online videos and things like that, but also he's got a podcast as well as the Diginomica website as well, of course. So really good stuff. We'll appreciate having him back on the show, even though he doesn't even realize he was back on the show because we replayed the clip. But we will invite him back because I'd love to have him back on the show here in the near future to talk about sort of a refresh of those predictions and catch up with him on what he's seeing, what's changed in the last year or so. But to your point, I would love to hear the audience comments here as well. Just drop whatever platform you're listening or watching on, just drop in the chat what you think some of the relevant trends are in that discussion, or things that you think have changed, or things you would add to the list. I'd love to hear your feedback there. And like you mentioned at the beginning of the show, Kyler, if you have any audience questions that you want us to cover on this show, be sure to tag us, tag Third Stage Consulting, or tag Kyler in whatever platform you're watching, and we'll be sure to get to those and add them to the, what do you call them, the jar that we draw from to see which questions we're going to cover.
Jar. If you'd like, the marketing professional needs help naming things. So if you'd like to promote a name for the jar, that's very open too. But we're going to start with the aired question jar.
Keep it simple. Yeah. No buzzwords yet. You're just going to name it some buzzword just to trigger me, I'm sure, at some point.
I absolutely am. I love buzzwords. I unapologetically love buzzwords. So
AI infused, hybrid cloud, multi-tenant, blockchain based. Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. I love all that stuff too. All right, good. Well, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks for the great conversation. Again, new episodes every Wednesday on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter, as well as audio podcast platforms. You can check us out on all or some or all of the platforms above. So be sure to check us out. Leave us a review and comments. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks again for listening. We'll see you next week on Transformation Ground Control. Have a great week in the meantime. Take care. Top 10. Whoa. Ugh, top 10. Yeah, so it's solid. It can only get better from here. More to talk about. We're going to take a quick break. You're listening to almost. Can't mess up the name of the podcast. That's probably the wrong spot to stutter.
A core message.
Yeah. General best practices, don't screw up the name of the show. All right.